by letter today or to the Planning Commission, you will be unable to raise that issue at a subsequent item on appeal to the City Council or at a subsequent time on appeal to the Land Use Board of Appeals. Testimony and evidence must be directed toward the criteria that staff will describe or other criteria in the plan or land use code which you believe apply to the decision. Failure to specifically address the approved criteria that staff will describe also precludes the raising of an issue related to those criteria on appeal. At this time, I call for the staff to present the proposal along with applicable approval standards and make a recommendation.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Commissioners. Just briefly, really quickly, I have a couple items before you today. We have Land Use File 2304, which is the Municipal Code Amendment. Includes amendments to Title 16, it includes municipal code amendments as well regarding some administrative rules, noise, learning, camping prohibitions as well. In this, Marcy McNally next to me from Earthworks and Keith Biden, our planner, will be addressing those elements. We also have Tim Wood from FCS, who has been working on our FCP methodology with Todd Chase and Company, and he'll be giving the presentation on the FCP methodology. As part of Land Use File 2304, that's mostly just the code amendments that you've seen in your packet. I will say at this point in time that the staff is recommending a continuation of this hearing into another hearing in July, so it would be July 26th at 9:30 as well. Let me just confirm that date, if you will. I don't want to speak improperly. Yes, it would be Wednesday, July 26th at 9:30. We would look to continue this public hearing to allow us to refine some of our Title 13 and Goal 5 harbors, as well as some of the code language. We'd like to do a couple runs through the code to make sure everything works and is functional, and that we don't have any missteps along the way, if you will. But with that, we have a presentation from Keith and Marcy on our code amendments that we'd like to get started for you all. And I'm guessing I'm going to have to upload that.
As soon as running would have done that.
Otherwise, you know what? I have it on mine, so if you'll just bear with me.
So I will give a brief overview of the code amendments that we're talking about today. Marcy McAnally is the primary architect for the regulating plan, which is a portion of these code amendments, and she'll go into more detail about what's contained in there. And then we're just going to talk a little bit about next steps, and then open it up for any questions that you folks or comments that you folks might have already. Or if you have any comments, concerns, or things that we should be thinking about as we fine-tune the draft code between now and the next slide. So just a little bit of review. We've been working on a number of different things, as you know. Some of them have been citywide amendments to the comprehensive plan. We recently adopted a transportation system plan, the first one the city has had. And then, of course, we have the community development code in place that we've been using citywide. We've been working on a community-specific plan for Kingston Terrace. And in response to that, we're looking at adding a new chapter to the Community Development Code, called Chapter 16-114, that would cover the requirements for Kingston Terrace. This would also include, one of the main pieces would be the regulating plan that Marcia will talk about a little bit more, which gets into a lot of the detail on how development should take place in this area. So then eventually it will be used for development-specific proposals, starting with annexation, development agreements between the city and the property owner developer on how, what the expectations of the city and the developer can be going forward. Development plan review, which would be a different plan review process from what you're accustomed to now. Typically, we run our applications through a site plan review or conditional use process or subdivision. This would take the place of that in the Kingston Terrace area. I'd say that maybe our similarities go, it's probably closest to our site plan review process in the way it would work. Marcy can go through that a little bit more in a minute. And then also assuring that there's a provision for adequate public facilities. And part of that, of course, is going to hinge on the SDC strategy that you're going to be talking about a little later here. Next. So the code amendments that we're talking about today are really responsible for implementing the Kingston Terrace Master Plan to create new town center and walkable neighborhoods, mix of housing for a range of incomes, and we've also talked about density targets to meet for these different neighborhoods, provide for natural resource protection, which we've been talking about quite a bit as we've been going through this, and then ensuring the provision of adequate facilities and services for this area. So in your packet, you have a staff report and then two exhibits. Exhibit A is the draft, the new chapter that I mentioned, 16-114. It would reside in Article 3. So in Article 3, we have our different zoning districts. This would be a new district called Kingston Terrace District. We also have a few small definition changes in Chapter 1624 relating to signs that apply here and then also citywide. Article 2 procedures. These are amendments that would apply citywide. We felt that this was not necessarily linked with Kingston Terrace in any particular way, but we particularly wanted to clarify the review procedure types that the city uses. So many cities use a type 1, 2, 3, and 4 description for different procedures. We have essentially followed those 4, but we've called them administrator, city manager, planning commission, city council. So it's made it a little bit confusing. So the idea here is to clearly identify these procedures by type. And then later on, we'll get into the rest of the code and make sure that we refer to these procedures. So for the time being anyway, it's the Article 2 procedure section refers to procedure type and the description. So we're saying type 1, administrative, type 2, city manager, and so forth, because in the rest of the code, it only talks about administrative city manager. So at least there's no confusion in the interim. Article 4, development standards, we have some minor changes proposed relating to landscaping, vision clearance, and signing. And these came up as we were going through Kingston Terrace code provisions. You'll notice at the very beginning, we have a table that talks about what provisions in the Community Development Code would continue to apply in Kingston Terrace and which ones would be replaced by the provisions in 16-114. In some cases, it made more sense to change our requirements or standards slightly in the code and then continue to have sections relating to landscaping, vision clearance, and signs apply to Kingston Terrace. That's why some of these amendments, since they were so small, are just changing how we do things in the city. And then we have a new chapter, 16192, for annexation. That has been a chapter number and title, but no text before. It's a placeholder, and we're finally getting around to articulating what the annexation process ought to be. Next slide. As Mike mentioned, there are some other municipal code amendments that are in your packet in Exhibit B. Now, these really have nothing to do with Kingston Terrace or land development. It was just a good opportunity to do some municipal code cleanup along with the rest of this ordinance. And so you'll see that it has to do with minor changes to planning commission and city council procedures. Under nuisances, we have a noise ordinance, and we've been finding that the decibel level maximums are really difficult to enforce because they're unreasonably low. So we're proposing a minor change in the decibel level, some changes to open burning requirements and clarifying things between the city and TDF. And then finally, a new chapter on overnight camping to specify where that might be allowed and where it's not allowed. Next slide, please. So as we've discussed, putting together this very large code proposal has been complicated with lots of moving parts. We ran into some unanticipated complexity relating to what's called Metro Title 13, and this is their riparian and upland habitat protection requirements that Metro has. Primarily, it's been the mapping of these areas has always been clear and distinct. It's just when you try to fashion some regulations on, well, what kind of flexibility can you allow in these areas? Can you allow any kinds of development? And if so, how much? What do you need to mitigate for, and so forth? It's been difficult to get that information from Metro. So I think we have figured this out now, but that caused some delay, and so we only have a rough draft that we will be working on with Metro and with Clean Water Services. So in short, those boundaries that are for these protected areas have always been known, and they're shown in all of our plan maps. So that's not the confusion part. It's the what do you allow within these areas or not allow within these areas. Refine that. So that is supposed to be back in draft form before you on July 26th. We also have another, there's a requirement to have local wetland inventories. Typically, this is supposed to be in advance of development. We will be working with Department of Land Conservation and Development to determine exactly when those inventories will be done. But we didn't have, until we had all property owners willing to allow people on site to do these evaluations, so we thought we would hold off on those until properties came in for annexation. That might be an acceptable level way to do it as far as the state is concerned, but we're still working on that. The other thing is we've talked about already, we have a very new development process relating to annexation and rezoning, the use of development agreements at that point, so that there's clear expectations on the part of the developer and the city, who's doing what, who's paying for what. We have all these requirements drafted, but we think that after we got it done, we realized that we need to take a little more time to take a closer look at these and make sure that the requirements that we have in the draft will work in practice. Next slide, please. So as we've talked about, and Marcy will get into the regulating plan a little bit more in a minute, it is a departure from our current approach. So what we're thinking of doing in the interim between now and the 26th, along with entertaining any questions, comments, concerns that you folks might have for the public, is call off a road test the code and just run some hypothetical development scenarios, see if all of the stuff that we have in here is in place, makes sense, is mutually supportive and so forth, just to make sure we don't have any glitches. Finally, let's see, next slide. So as we've indicated, we'd like to just have a discussion with you as to what you think of the draft so far. That we'll conduct a road test between now and the next hearing to make sure that we have considered there are any questions we need to make. We'll also recombine the Title 13 work, the upland habitat work, and have that included in the code package again. I'm not remembering exactly what subsection that was. I think 114, 110. In your draft, it shows up as a place. And then again, have the sign. Okay. I don't know, I hadn't had a chance to talk with Mike about this, but I guess one possibility would be that he could go ahead and make a recommendation on Exhibit B, and we could just done with that as far as the planning commission is concerned, put that aside, and we can just focus on the other material on the 26th, or just hold off on this. I don't know if it matters much.
I'll chime in on it. I think right now, in my opinion, I think it's a better process if we have everything together and move forward together, just because it's cleaner when we look at annexations, it's cleaner when we look at the requirements for the Goal 5, the Title 13, and all the other amendments on the meeting code, and it's all one fell swoop of through the PAPA process and everything else. So PAPA is a post-acknowledgement plan amendment, and right now we have it all rolled into one bundle. We were going to pull the Title 13 and Goal 5 harbors out and then bring those under a later one, just because there was some ambiguity with the Metro draft ordinance that we were basing our Title 13 draft off of. And so we felt that we needed some enhancement to that to add some better objectives, some clear and objective standards that we identified and that actually are workable with our development code. So we were still working on that a little bit. So we had pulled that off, and we were going to delay that and then start a whole new PAPA process for just that piece in particular. But since we still have some road test items that we need to do with the code work, we just want to, that gives us more opportunity to finish up the little pieces that we did on the Title 13 stuff, which is technically in draft form right now, and then roll that back in to the planning commission before next month. So essentially, by continuing this hearing from this month into next month, one, we get a chance to take public testimony today, listen to the concerns, go back throughout some of those concerns if the planning commission finds them applicable, and then re-present them next month. And then hopefully at the end of next month, like I mentioned earlier, that would be the July 6th planning commission meeting, and that would be at 9:30 a.m. at this location and on Zoom hybrid. We would essentially have those components pulled together and be ready to hopefully get a recommendation for approval from the planning commission. So with that, pass it off to RC, go over regulating plan.
Okay. I'm really confused.
Yeah, let me get out of that one. Yeah. Running people, a regulating plan PowerPoint. Oh, you want Keith?
Yeah, I think it's good, Dr. King. I don't think I have. Never mind, Ron.
Okay. I only have the two PowerPoints, one. That's more.
Which slide would you like?
Go to the
regulating plan of the street.
Okay.
Scroll down.
Start
You
with
can look and check.
the first colored one.
This here.
So, this is, I'll start talking about this while we're running it full screen. This is, section 1410403 neighborhood zones. And this is the map, figure 2, that shows the neighborhood zones. And I want to explain how the neighborhood zones map and then the regulating plan work. Yeah.
We're having a hard time hearing you.
Oh, okay. Yeah, maybe I should stand up.
Yep, or move over
Or
to the speaker.
the speaker to a,
Is there a speaker?
There.
I mean, a mic.
Does this
speaker's
work
right
better?
there.
Is this better?
You do this.
Marcy, you could speak to that.
Check. Just have to hold it close.
That's so fun.
One more hand hold it. Like this. This look better?
Yeah.
Okay. So, I want to talk about the, neighborhood zones, which is shown on page 73 of your packet. It's section 030, and talks particularly to this map called, number 2, neighborhood zones. The neighborhood zones and the regulating plan, which is a graphic in section that follows, are like a zoning code, the zoning map, but it's kind of a zoning map plus. We have these 4 neighborhood zones, as you can see, the 4 colors of the legend. The red is the town center, the orange is the East Bend neighborhood, the yellow is the central neighborhood, and the whitish color is rural character neighborhood. And then everything in between those colors is the natural resource area that will be subject to the Title 13. But the colored areas are developable, subject to some of the edge conditions where, if they're, as Pete was describing, they're in, Class B, they may be somewhat, it may be possible for a developer or a property owner to re-map those. But I want to talk about how the colors map works much like a zoning map, in that the colors allow they describe which uses are permitted, conditional, and prohibited. And if you turn to the next page and you see the uses table, this is very conventional zoning code type of table. It shows you what types of dwellings that are currently permitted in your code. Do you remember that we went through the middle housing rule that incorporated a lot of middle housing types within your code? And so those are all listed as to where they're permitted. They're all permitted everywhere, except that in the rural character neighborhood, certain multi-dwelling is not, or there are limitations on it. The real difference between the colors is the central neighborhood, which is the yellow gold color, does not allow any commercial development, nor does the white color. They're entirely residential. But in the red and the orange, the red is largely commercial mixed use, the orange is largely residential with some mixed use or commercial components. There will be limitations, there are limitations on the size. So this governs the uses that are permitted and the dimensional standards of the building, including the net density assigned to each neighborhood or each development. So I want to point out on page 75, under section 1.50 density and dimensional standards, we have a net density definition that's unique to Kingston Terrace. It departs from your current density definition. It's in section B. It's defined as gross area left, streets, parks and open space, storm facilities, natural resources, and uses that are not residential. So it's essentially just the pure development area. And we have, in order to meet our requirements for House Bill 2001 master planning, and also, to meet our metro requirements for, the minimum number of units in the entire Kingston Terrace neighborhood Kingston Terrace plan area to be 3,300 units. Each, neighborhood is assigned a minimum net density assigned to each development, and then a minimum number of units that must be accommodated by each neighborhood. So it will be part of the development agreement process to ensure that those standards are met. If we can go to the rate, are there any questions about that? We could go to the regulating plan. So
Okay.
the regulating plan is the land use map plus the streets and the street types and their connections. And you'll notice that the pattern of streets is the same as the backbone streets map in the master plan. And the regulating plan takes that system of backbone streets and uses it as the, set certain locations for intersections. And it's a bit of a challenge to zone an area that doesn't have defined limitations for the zoning. So we're using the backbone system plus the natural resource edge to define exactly where these zones go. You'll notice that some of the zones are actually defined by the east-west street. And so the East End neighborhood is defined by the east-west collector, at which point it transitions southward to become the central neighborhood. Similarly, at the character neighborhood, the upper eastern west street is the boundary for the land use bounds. And the intersection key is very important. You'll notice in the legend that there are 3 types of intersections, each with a different legend. And intersections type 1 and 2 are less movable, but these have to be adjustable to some degree to account for topography, property ownership, phasing, etc. But intersections 1 and 2, if you look at the key, those are more fixed in their location. We know generally, for example, that Southwest 150th is an extension of an existing street, so we know where that intersection is likely to be and where the intersections south of it are likely to be. So those are required to be in those locations, but adjustable according to subsection B, which is on page 10. Another important aspect to the regulating plan is that it lays out the type of streets that each of those connections will be. And the intersections are fixed but somewhat adjustable, and the alignment that the street can take from one intersection to another is also flexible. But the street itself must meet one of the standards for street cross sections that are detailed starting on page about 97. So there's a series of cross sections, and there's a table with minimum and maximum dimensions for each component, and these are correlated to the TSP requirements, but they also offer quite a lot of flexibility for certain types of streets so that we can achieve that context-sensitive design for streets that we have as a goal in our master plan. That's probably enough detail about it. I'm happy to answer your question.
I was just writing down here that at some place in this document, it talks about changing the character of Fisher Road as it goes through the rural characters, that becomes a narrower street. And I'm wondering if that is reflected in this particular map we're talking about.
Not reflected in this map. It doesn't say precisely where that transition in character could take place. But the section, the cross sections that permit that design are included. That actually,
What's the packet number? Page number, okay, we got
If
cross-section.
you look at page, 103, the rural
Okay,
character neighborhood street design is described, and it also has a row in the table. So this allows us to meet the requirements of the TSP street classification for a collector there, but to allow an alternative design in segments of that collector. Maybe I could also point out that there's some other designs for local streets here, I think would be important to know about, some narrow streets, so reducing stormwater and allowing, some alternatives to create within the plan, within the, part, what is typically the parking zone, you could actually have a combination of, parking pockets and planting instead, and have stormwater treatment. So there's a goal, to allow in the local street system, some alternatives, and even there's a narrow street C, parking that could be used as a Wooner type development.
uh-huh,
And then there are standards for alleys as well, so because alley design is really important.
So if this, see, my concern is that once we're all gone and this map becomes our code, somebody's going to say, no, we have to have this street, street cross-section, through this area, because on the map it shows that that is a collector street. And the rural character neighborhood street, is there any, I'm looking for something there that's also was,
We can certainly add that to a table, that, that street type, or it could also be, amplified on the regulating plan that from the intersection, I think it's generally assumed that the intersection that's, if you look at the regulating plan, can you point at the intersection that's just to the west of the rural character neighborhood on the collector street?
Just to the west of it, this one right here,
This one right here.
on 150th, or on the bottom of 147,
Maybe at a minimum, it would be at that intersection right
and where it starts.
where the rural character version of the collector would be required. That could be to the regulating plan. And then-
okay, yeah. We'll be gone one day, and then the planner will go. Huh?
I think the plan had called for, just a stepping down at the major spots, so.
Yeah,
Like it steps down at Elkner and then it steps down at 150th. So I thought that's kind of what the TSP had called for anyway,
okay,
just going through the area to be kind of slowly but surely getting to that rural character feel
right.
towards the
Mhm.
end there from about, I believe it was, just to the east of 150th to, where it connects into King City currently.
Right, yeah.
So,
Yeah, just want them to be consistent together.
If I could just say one thing that, if you look at the table on page 9, the portion of the row that includes the rural character neighborhood street. It has a footnote under bike facility, that means that on a collector street, bicycle facility may be accommodated on a parallel separate route.
Right, yeah,
And that is to address specific, concerns that we received from Washington County about, told us that we would need to have a bicycle facility on a street that is classified as a collector. So obviously, if we want to achieve a narrower right of way in this one segment, we'll need to find an alternative, a parallel route for that bicycle facility.
oh, okay.
So that's noted as a, to account.
Okay. So we're talking right now up to streets. Roads and streets, right? I went through, I had a lot of questions about the whole thing, so I'm not sure what we're discussing. I'm really confused. What are we discussing?
The proper format right now, is to open up to public comment.
Okay,
The public is here to voice their concerns, and it's our job to listen to those. So I believe at this point in time, staff has presented staff report on where we're at on this. Our recommendation right now is that, we're recommending that we continue it into July to finish the items that we've mentioned and conduct the road test, make sure everything functions properly. And then, we would have, 5 versions presented to the planning commission in July that, should function on all levels.
okay.
And at that point in time, we'd be looking for, the commission to make a determination on a direction at that point. We do still have the FCC methodologies, but I think we'll put that, really want to go through that right now. Do we have these combined, or?
Yeah.
All right, so we could ask that, we do your FCC methodology presentation now before we open it up to, public comment?
Sure. We're in public hearing right now, so open it up.
But isn't this part of the?
No. It's part of the packet, but it's not. You have 2 public
All
hearings
right,
and a presentation. Presentation's at the end.
okay,
You can't, she already opened it up. If you needed to move that item up, we needed to move that up in the beginning of the meeting.
so it's on the agenda later.
Yeah, after the public hearing.
Okay, all right. Okay, Jim, you're on.
All right, that's all right. Robert?
So with that, then, Chair, I would say that, we open it up for public testimony and hear from the public on this item.
Okay, so at this point in time, I would call for public testimony, for what has been presented thus far.
Jan?
I'm a little bit at a loss because we aren't really making any kind of,
Right, but we still operate as a public hearing. So we still have proponents an opportunity, their 3 minutes, opponents an opportunity to have their 3 minutes, and a neutral comment.
okay. On here, you had said 5 minutes on this one, so, and I can't figure out how to make this little timer thing.
All right, I can do a timer.
Oh, on your phone, good. Okay, so, at this point in time, I am going to, what's that? I need to, okay, I'm sorry.
Do you need to push this thing?
Do I need to push this thing in or no?
No, you're-
Okay,
you're-
I'm on. All right, so at this point in time, I would ask any member of the audience, do we have numbers today?
No numbers, but it'd be like we did last time, if we first come first served. And you,
Okay, so, number 1?
I don't know.
I don't know. I don't mean to,
I like my numbers.
Morning, I'm Gretchen Diener, 16585 South Royalty Parkway. I'm very familiar with this process, having worked through several major code revisions, I should say, and having gone through this process with the City of Tigard. In general, I'm in favor of the code provisions as they have been presented. I wanted to add just a couple of comments. To the degree that you're reviewing the noise code provisions, please be aware of fireworks. They're incredibly noisy and invasive, and, unfortunately, we have an area that is next to the city, but not in the city, and they use fireworks that are illegal and are shooting up in the air anyway.
Are you referring to Tigard?
No, I said Incorporated.
Unincorporated.
Thinking of particularly the apartment complex. They're notorious for having them out on Fisher Road. Anyway, that we make sure that as we do the code provision, that we give the police sufficient parameters that they can go after the violators, because Fisher Road is in King City. Okay. Second comment I wanted to make, with respect to the rural character road, Fisher Extension, and any streets that go off of there, that we, if we're going to have a bike path, which I understand, a bike path we have to have because of the collector, please put in the code that it would be a permeable surface so that you're not adding to the runoff issues.
Yeah.
We did that in Tigard, and I think it really helped with the whole issue for stormwater. Thank you, those are my comments. Thank you.
Number 2, please.
I give you my pen, Ronnie.
Good morning, Mike Meyer, 16950 Southwest Meyer Lane, Tigard. This is more reactive to some of the things that have been said and just a general kind of scan of the information that was in your packet today. So, first of all, thank you for the 5 minutes. 3 minutes is way too short. And you do have flexibility when you set time limits, so I appreciate the fact that you set your time limit at 5 minutes. My first concern is the Planning Commission. The fact that there's been 2 vacancies for such a long time, and there was a statement made that they were going to fill those vacancies fairly quickly, and that wasn't accomplished. And now we've got 2 more that have expired, and why wasn't sitting on top of making sure that those expirations were handled in an appropriate manner, appropriate timing. So now we have 3. So I'm glad to hear that the recommendation will be delayed until July 26th. So hopefully we can get 2 more planning commissioners here. So one of the things on the agenda, I think, is making the planning commission a quorum of 3, which in future decision-making and rulings, could potentially only have 2 planning commissioners making a decision on important city matters. Horrible. You should have a fully staffed planning commission when making important decisions such as what we're going through right now with the transportation system plan and master planning process. So I think that the city needs to concentrate on making sure they have a staffed planning commission. So one point that Marcy brought up about 150th being a street. 150th is not a street. It's a runway, actually. The property to the west of 150th on the lower side below the Hoswicki property, that's actually supposed to be accessed by a gravel dirt driveway on the west side. But the rest of that whole area is not a street. There's about 400 feet that's paved. That's actually part of the runway. That's private property. It is not a street. As far as the noise issue goes on decibel levels, I'm not sure what the decibel level they're planning on setting it at, but what's 85 decibels? Right? What's 65 decibels? What does that equate to?
I looked it up.
So you looked it up, but I think that they should be providing that information to you guys so you have an idea of what the standard is going to be and what those measurements are and what they sound like. I don't know if it's a reaction to maybe upcoming construction or what, but if they're going to raise noise limits on, drummers playing in their garage and that sort of thing, then you need to be aware of what that level is and if the police are able to have accurate measuring devices to ensure compliance. So part of the information in the packet, there was information regarding community parks. And there's 2 community parks planned. One of them has to be on our property, and I brought this up to Steve Faust a while back in an email, which was shared with the council. So a community park by definition in the draft includes ballparks, restroom facilities, tennis courts, parking, that sort of thing. And I just I can't envision how a community park would work where it's currently located on my property, in Class 1 riparian area and steep slope area. Now, if you look to the property, as I recommended Steve Faust, they look at the property immediately to my west, which has more gradual terrain, slope, and would be more suitable for a park and ball fields and parking and whatnot. And that property actually has been purchased for sale, for speculation. So I believe that property owner is probably going to sell that property. So I believe it's better suited, and it's not that far away from the current location. What else do I have? If you look at the findings for Goal 8 in there, one of the things it says is when it addresses parks, help conserve natural areas and open lands. And the most significant feature of the system is preservation of the interconnected naturally occurring ravines and forested open spaces along the Tollett River. So I think that those goals should be taken seriously and addressed when you're trying to locate a community park. And here is the map in your packet that shows the 2 community parks. One here out toward the
Page number on that?
east side, I think it's 13.
Okay.
And my recommendation is that you put it where the X is. I don't know if you can see where that's on the map. You can see.
Where is your property?
The property is right here where the green community park circle is, and that's right in the green in the Class 1 riparian area, which is a very, very bad location for it. But over here, you can see it's up above the Class 1 riparian area.
Okay.
So there's that.
Page 21 in the packet.
What's that?
It's page 21 of the packet.
And that's all I have. So my
Okay,
perfect.
all right.
All right, thank you so much, Mike. Number 3? Okay.
Don, can you hear us? You asked her time, can you-
Hello?
Don, can you hear us? You're up. There you go.
Okay, sorry, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Geez, okay. No. I'm unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, thank you. Okay, I am Dawn Mobley. I live at 17030 Southwest 137th in the Rivermead community. I read through most of this paperwork and noticed, at least I wanted to mention a couple of typos, I believe are typos. One is on page 9 under the 16.144.060 code. I believe you are meaning to note 137th. But it still states 131st. So I noticed that error, and I noticed the same error on page 96 in relation to 16.144.030, item A.1, I believe is what I noted here on my notes. So anyway, you might want to take a look at that. I would think that that would matter, that you're speaking about 137th, which is a very primitively maintained road that I have noticed that you would like to connect very many roads to our road, including the connection at Fisher Road and 137th. I would like to note that that is only about, again, my estimation is probably wrong, but it's close to about 200 feet away from the existing roundabout that is already in place on Fisher Road. And it looks as if you are planning to place another roundabout within 100 feet, which is about the length of my property. So maybe making that 300 to 400 feet away from another roundabout. And I find that to be absolutely ridiculous. I will also note that the narrow road that you speak of through this rural community, when you're trying to do 2 lanes of traffic plus bicycle plus multi-use, and then you want to narrow it as well, seems convenient, I would say, for making it an unsafe road when you're trying to make it a collector. I have concerns about being able to safely exit my property. I have concerns about being able to safely walk along the road, in which I feel safe to do so now. And then I have also just wanted to kind of be concerned about the roundabout and the size of which you're speaking, because there was a clarification between roundabouts and traffic circles. So I'm also concerned about the fact that this road is not set up currently to be a major roadway, and plus people using 137th to exit at Roy, not just at Fisher, but at Beef Bend Road, and that being just a stop sign, and there is already traffic to consider when you're exiting and entering our neighborhood. And now if you connect the roads and then do no other improvements until property owners start to sell property, from what I was reading in this code, that's how it would work. I am concerned that there's going to be continuous safety issues, just like they were on 131st when you guys built up 131st. I remember it taking many, many years before a light was put in, and that was with a school being at the corner. So I was curious, with this code, how that would all work out in order to not only just ensure the safety of those that already live here, but those that are traveling this road in the future. And with that, I believe I have enough objections in regards to those things. I have another couple concerns in regards to I work from home, so being able to continue to work from home. In this code, I was a little confused about what that might mean in the future, but I think I need to do a little bit more research in that as well, to understand what the zoning would allow in regards to what I do from my current property. And that is everything. Thank you.
May I ask Don a question?
No.
Okay.
All right, I have Barry Mitchell online.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great. Good morning, commissioners. My comment deals with quorum requirements. Moving that to 3 is a concern. Quorum isn't defined in the Oregon's public meeting laws, but the default quorum appears to be a majority of the governing body. And since the governing body is currently defined as 7 members to be on the commission, the quorum should it not then be 4, not 3? Only 3 members as a quorum means that 2 people can make decisions for the entire community of Kingston Terrace and King City. What was that? Was that
A public hearing comment?
Sorry, Mr. Mitchell, I'll let you go ahead. It is in the code amendment to amend the municipal code. And I think Mr. Mitchell makes a valid point. We shouldn't give it a definitive number. It should just be the majority of city and councilmen, or council and commission members.
Mhm.
Go ahead, Mr. Mitchell, sorry.
Okay, where did you mute me? I was in the middle of speaking and you cut me off. I wasn't sure what you had heard.
About 4 minutes left, Mr. Mitchell.
Okay,
You were talking
regarding
about,
noise, regarding noise, I suggest that the commissioners and the staff take a look at other city noise requirements and incorporate the best of those noise regulations, not just to increase the decibel level to King City, but look at those, incorporate the best ones that are for the most benefit of the citizens of King City. I've looked at those and they're quite interesting. And I think maybe some of the regulations that are in other cities would be beneficial. That's the extent of my comments. Thank you.
so you'll understand what a decibel is.
Oh.
It's just me talking, but gets it to about 70.
Is it conversation?
Just a straight conversation with us is about 75, 80 decibels.
And that's the limit that they want to set?
We're trying to get it set,
You want to get just conversational
just
level?
conversation level.
Yes.
For
Right now, you're not allowed to talk over a whisper or rustle papers.
Ah.
That's why our police department is like, this is untenable.
I mean, even conversational is a little low. Is it possible to go mid higher?
That's why,
Right now, I am talking at between 73 and 75 decibels.
yeah, he's still on, sorry. I was just sharing that with
That's interesting.
you done.
Well,
Mr. Mitchell, were you done talking? You still have 2 minutes left.
Yes, I said I was done talking, but maybe I was muted again. I don't know. Sorry. Yes, I'm finished. Thank you.
thank you, Jerry.
Any more, Ronnie, online? Okay, so I think we would be up to number 4. And people that are here. Or number 5. Are there people in the audience who wanted to speak who did not pull a number or register?
Was there anyone online? Please raise your digital hand if you'd like to speak.
Morning, my name's Dan Brenner. I live at 14120 Southwest River Lane. I'd just like to say that due to the obvious confusion, everywhere it seems, I'm really glad that you're just going to continue this.
Yes, we are definitely continuing. Thank you for your comment. Is there anyone else in the audience that would like to make a comment? Anybody else online?
Someone else has raised their hand. Mark Dane has his hand up. Mark, did you have anything that you wanted to say, or was that for later?
No, it's related to the decibel measurements, how it's measured. This is Mark Dane, 825 Southeast 32nd Avenue, Portland, Oregon 97214. For informational purposes only, it takes up to 85 decibels before things become an issue. Sort of the 80 to 89 range is a power mower, air conditioner, like a chatting restaurant. Whereas, for example, like the Toowoomba, the Subway would be 90. I think you need to push it up to 80 to 85, no more than 85 decibels. But about 85 would be a heavy restaurant. People just talking within a restaurant, loud conversation, or a lawnmower. But people do need to be able to mow lawns. So I was going to suggest putting it up to 85 max and no less than 80. That's just my suggestion.
Right now, what we have in there is 70.
75, I think.
It's, you know, it's measured from the adjacent, it's measured from the property line. So it gives you a little bit of a air buffer from wherever they're talking to the edge of the property line. I think that's what we have, right, Keith, if I recall?
The proposal that's in your packet is to go between 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. to go from 55 to 75, and from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. from 45 to 60.
Still less than us talking here.
Just to let you
But
know,
that is, yes,
that
go
would
on,
prevent, that would prevent any construction occurring anywhere.
Are we still in public testimony right now?
I'm sorry. Stop.
Sorry, Mark, your time is still going.
Well, I was going to say, I heard the comment about the recommendation. You have to allow trash trucks. You have to allow emergency vehicles. You have to allow construction. And that's why you don't start construction, I think it's before 7 o'clock in the morning, which is fine, but you're limiting all noise during the day to a conversation between neighbors over a fence. I think you have to allow construction, you have to allow trucks, you have to allow just standard everyday daytime events to happen. I mean, Amazon trucks, they're going everywhere all the time, school buses. So my suggestion is that you raise that maximum during the daytime hours to between 80 and 85 decibels. It may not seem like a lot, but the graph scale, try to remember the name of the curve that goes up. It's a geometric curve. So it's not just an even curve. It's the same way that hurricanes are measured. So that's my recommendation. Thank you.
Any more public testimony? Otherwise, if there is none, does staff have any rebuttal from that they wish to bring up based on the public testimony?
So if I could, I think staff.
Sorry, we unmuted over here and then echoed. So at this point, and as we mentioned earlier, the staff recommendation is to continue to July. But we can offer a little bit of rebuttal. As you see, we do have a decibel meter that our police have walked around and tried out and tried to come up with something in between. Before, our decibel was 55 and 45, which is me rustling papers on my desk. Or that's like your 45, 55. So us just talking is going to be in the 75 to 85 range. And as Mr. Dana pointed out, like what we're seeing most other cities come up with is somewhere between the range of 70 to that 85, some up to 89 or even 90, measured from property line. So, and we do have some exceptions written into our code for some activities. And we've kind of taken a kind of a conservative look at this, and that's what we were recommending. But I do believe that there's we're still on the very conservative side on what we're proposing with our decibel levels. And the commission may want to look at that and recommend something a little more liberal on that. Maybe identify some key measuring points, like maybe it's 80 decibels sustained for a certain amount of time, measured from a property line. But you still need exceptions for your lawnmower, blower, trucks, buses, things of that nature during the daytime hours when businesses or residents are working on their properties or anything like that, because it will exceed that 80, 85 decibel level for an extended amount of time, for as long as they're operating. Heavy equipment will also exceed that 80 decibel threshold. So I think just identifying the limits of that might be something this commission looks at. I think that the document before you, I know that code is very challenging and can be confusing when we look at regulating plans and code work and things of that nature. There's a lot in here. There's a lot to digest. There's a lot of components here that will direct the future growth and design of what our town centers look like, what our municipal uses look like. I did want to point out that there was one error that I saw in the comp plan map that shows a neighborhood mixed use, and then it just shows neighborhood. And so I just wanted to say that that strip along River Terrace Boulevard is town center mixed use, neighborhood mixed use. For that full stretch on both sides of River Terrace Boulevard, there was a little spot that was kind of left out of that map. I also wanted to mention, there was a comment about working from home. Home occupations are a use that is permissible through conditional uses or even administrative use or administrative approvals through our office, typically throughout the city. People do apply for home occupations, and we do approve them regularly. I think it's just an effect on how that home occupation is going to, what effects that home occupation is going to have on the neighbors. And as long as it's not generating a lot of traffic, then I don't think that there would be much concern raised at that point in time.
Yeah. So we do, just speaking of home occupations, you'll notice that the proposal is that the home occupation rules that the city has currently would apply in Kingston as well. We have two types. We have one that essentially you're working on your own, you don't have clients coming to visit your business. That's more or less an administrative review, like Mike was saying. And then there's another one that has a limited amount of clients that can come to your house every day. Customers, clients, I don't remember what that is exactly. I think it's half dozen a day, something in that neighborhood. And then you need to have a city manager review that requires some public notice. Those are the two. So if that person is still online, concerned about the home occupation requirements, once annexed, you should find that in chapter 16, 172 in the municipal code.
I think other comments we received were use of permeable asphalt potentially for trails and things of that nature. I think those are definitely elements that we can explore and utilize, especially in sensitive areas. I also believe that with most of our roads, there's also factors where we can partner with Clean Water Services to design light stormwater enhancement, they call them LIDAR, right? LIDAR.
Low impact development.
And they're essentially linear stormwater boxes that take the stormwater, filter them before they get back into the system. But there's also opportunity for regional stormwater in our plan. A lot of that is regulated by Clean Water Services, and so having a strong partnership with Clean Water Services in the development phase will actually help us in developing those stormwater elements and components and trying to help those pieces. Those are also addressed in here and will be addressed further as we add back in the Title 13 component, the lake and wetland element.
I just wanted to address, the language in here about intersections and, point out that, yes, the reference to 131st is a typo, and say that the regulating plan refers to intersections that are identified in the TSP. So 150th is identified as a future street and intersection, and so that is how the regulating plan refers to it. It's not intended to say that it's referring to, it says that the location of that intersection on East Bend. So this is an aspect to understand about the regulating plan is building on the TSP, and all of the identified streets and intersection projects in the TSP.
I just want to chat about, really quick, in discussion, Mr. Mitchell brought up the quorum. A quorum currently under definition is a majority of the sitting body. So the sitting body right now is U3. U3 are the sitting body for the planning commission, therefore 2 constitutes a quorum as it sits right now. With 5, 3 is quorum. With 7, then 4 is quorum. It's the majority. So right here in what was being proposed, we had put 3, a reduction from 4. What it really should be is a majority of the sitting body. So those that are actually still sitting on the, because you're going to have vacancies on commissions, you're going to have vacancies on councils, and filling those positions isn't always easy when you have a voluntary board. I agree with Mr. Mitchell that it should be a majority. I would also point out, though, that it needs to be a majority of the sitting body, the majority of those that are actually sitting on the commission or council at that point in time. Then I'll talk about camping. Camping provisions are something that came in part as part of this Boise hearing, or Boise versus, or something like that.
Martin v. Boise?
Yes, thank you. And essentially, it requires cities to identify a time, place, or manner for overnight camping and identify a spot for that. What we've done in our camping code is identify that spot as the area adjacent to City Hall on the east side here. So from the city property that's owned up here by where our Connex is down to the end of City Hall right here on the east side is where we've identified for camping in our city. That allows us to keep an eye on any nefarious activities with our police force next door, and also it allows us to administer this in a manner in which is acceptable, and we can clean it out in the morning. They'll have access to trash and dumpsters, and in the hours of 9 p.m. to 7 a.m. It prohibits camping in our natural areas or parks, prohibits camping basically anywhere else in the city except for this one location or an approved camping place. That was the camping piece that Keith had mentioned earlier. Some of the other elements that we've included in here were opening up the open burning to be more in line with what TVFNR regulates. Currently, we have a no burn within city limits at all. So like a backyard barbecue pit or backyard fire pit doesn't comply. So adjusting this to make it more in compliance with TVFNR since this is something that, again, our police officers had identified as something that was untenable for them to regulate when it's really regulated by the fire chief and Walton Valley Fire and Rescue, which we coordinate with. So what we're proposing here is more in line with what TDF&R would regulate. Kind of takes, streamlines the administration of some of these small matters. And then, of course, the noise piece that you see in front of you, we are proposing 75 and 60 in here. But again, we feel that's probably on the conservative side, and the commission can probably take a look at that. We've looked at other cities. We looked at Tigard, Tualatin, Portland, and these are all in accordance with what they currently have on the books. But as you can tell, there would definitely need to be some exception identified in order to not violate the 75 decibels, because us just talking here in this room is going to push that decibel over 75. Okay, so the final element is the System Development Code, Section 3.02, which regulates how we operate with system development charges, how system development charges are implemented, and how they are utilized throughout the city code. This will be coming forward with the system development methodology, but this is the code section of that that's also included, and this will also be re-entering your packet for the July 6th, but it was presented to you today, and just kind of talks about all the things that we apply system development charges for, infrastructure related to water, sewer, drainage, flood control, transportation, including sidewalks, bicycle lanes, multi-use paths, traffic signs, signals, and it just lays out what we are allowed to charge system development fees for. Right. And how we do it.
So are we getting any kind of presentation today or at this point?
There is a presentation that Tim will give, and Tim is with FCS Group, and they're our hired consultants for developing our system development charge methodology. And so with that, and I'm skipping ahead, but Tim is essentially going to present on all the financial components that came out of our transportation system plan that identifies those infrastructure pieces, tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3, and how we fund those over the course of the next 20 to 30 years, as well as the parks, what those parks are going to be estimated at, and those public facilities, and how we justify collecting the system development charges you pay for those over the course of the next 20 years.
Okay, so
that'll be coming later on in your agenda.
So right now we discuss.
Right now, we can discuss, we can continue, we can answer questions, we can have open dialogue, back and forth. We're not asking you to close the public testimony. We're not asking you to close the public hearing. We're asking for just a continuation until July to reintroduce to you the Title 13 things that we pulled out last week. So when we were preparing your packet, we were not confident on where we were with the Title 13 elements and the Goal 5 elements, so we pulled those from it. We're going to run those on a separate course, but since we're requesting a continuation until next month, we're going to reinsert those and add them into the packet for next month.
So are we receiving a system development charge presentation today?
Yes, you will, after the variance hearing.
Can we close this part of?
And
Go ahead.
I like to discuss and ask and all those things.
I know you do.
Yeah.
And I'm so glad you do.
Because this is.
Because you often voice what I'm thinking.
One of my biggest concerns in the code in general is the natural hazards. because we haven't really addressed the fact that most of King City sits on a, what's it called? It happens in earthquakes called liquefaction. So we're sitting here on a floodplain, and that liquefaction, I was in Los Angeles during the Northridge earthquake, and that's what sent people out of their houses. I was on solid rock, nothing happened. I got jolted. So I am hoping that somewhere in the code that we tie our houses down, because your house falls off its foundation and suddenly you can't go in it. But because everybody's house has fallen off their foundation, there's nobody available to fix it. So suddenly you're out of your house for as much as, a couple of years. So I'd like to see something in the code about, and I don't know if this is statewide building code or King City, but I want to make sure it's somewhere stated that houses are tied to their foundations. Another thing that isn't mentioned in our hazard codes is the hazard of extreme heat. I heard a presentation on the radio by someone who was, from Phoenix, and she's like, well, we have the infrastructure for the climate change. We have the infrastructure for the heat. But who's getting affected most are those places where it's new. I mean, we didn't need an air conditioner when I moved here 30 years ago. But it got up to 100, what was it, 120, really? 125? I'm sorry, I can't believe it got that high. And 115 before that. So we're gonna be regularly getting up into the 100 degrees plus. So I'd like to see something in the code address that, that condition. Earlier today, I thought that maybe a community center could be a cooling center. But I think that that is actually one of our priorities. Let's see, what else? So I'm going from the packet number, page numbers, and on page 25, it said in density, let's see, is that cottage clusters, let's see. Well, at least I put it down on page 25.
This was the staff report, page 17, packet.
It's a packet. Yeah, staff reports, page 17, page 25 on the packet. Somewhere on here, it says that there would be 4 cottages per acre. I want that. It's a quarter acre per cottage. That's not very dense.
No.
And so I would like to examine that density standard.
The 16.146 density calculations amendments to clarify the density maximums do not apply to duplexes, quadplexes, triplexes, cottage clusters. The townhouses have a minimum density of 25 dwelling units per acre. Cottage clusters have a minimum density requirement of 4 dwelling units per acre.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
What page are we talking?
Page 25 of the.
Yeah, can we, I think, Marcy and her crew have been working on cottage clusters for some.
I love cottage clusters, especially these. Quarter acre?
This phrase, cottage clusters have a minimum density requirement of 4 dwelling units per acre and are exempt from density maximum. This is actually something that came from the House Bill 2001 language.
Oh.
For vegans, and it really is impossible to meet the standard for cottage clusters if you read all the other standards.
Oh.
And I'm not sure, there were a lot of comments from all over, like, why is it this language in there? It's very confusing. And I don't know what to say. It's just that we did kind of, according to the VLCT directions, we kept it in there. But if you read the cottage cluster standards, it will be that it's impossible to do anything that condemns, so.
So this is nonsensical.
I know, maybe we want to just not mention it in the findings of the staff report, but, because it's confusing, but it's actually in your code that way too, but it's immediately followed by all of the standards for cottage clusters.
Okay. Okay.
In the code it is, right?
Yes,
So,
and we can go through that in more detail at the next.
Yeah, these are things to go through in more detail, the next one.
I would recommend reading the entire section of that.
I'm wondering if we have we're talking about allowing ADUs, and page 49 of the packet. We're allowing ADUs, and I'm wondering, we're allowing bigger ADUs. Do we have a maximum lot coverage standard that might conflict with a larger ADU that's allowed but not allowed, but, we don't? Okay. On page 57, the city designates the Columbia Land Trust as open space / recreation. If we condemn part of the Columbia Land Trust for a road, we may or may not condemn the whole parcel. I guess I'm asking, does it figure into our recreation? I can see it as open space. Does it figure into our recreational budget? Because as I understand it, it's not allowed. It's like an easement that's not allowed to be built on or anything like that if it remains part of if we only condemn part of the Columbia Land Trust.
So if I hear your question correctly, I think you're asking if our monetary budget includes land condemnation outside of the road right-of-way?
Right. I'm wondering if the plan is to take the whole thing or just the road.
It would just be what we would need for the road.
Okay. So the Columbia Land Trust would remain kind of private, with their own rules and regulations of no roads, no paths, no people.
I think the easement says no roads, but I think there's opportunity for trails, ski trails,
Okay.
things of that nature.
I mean, I think it'd be really cool, but,
It's been a while since I've read the language in that
okay.
private easement, but,
All right.
yeah, you know, right now, I think what a comp plan identifies there is, parks and open spaces of
Yeah.
that piece in an effort to try to protect and buffer that.
Okay.
You know, so I think that's where it sits today.
All right. Yeah, it had recreation.
Right,
in the
parks and
language, and I just
recreation.
want to make sure that it's not counted as a place where we're supposed to go. for
Well, the
recreation.
upland areas around that would certainly be open for parks and recreation.
Oh, okay, good,
And
okay.
I think the conservation area there to the south, would still be, you know, open space, natural resources, parks and rec, you know.
Uh-huh, okay, so it'd be under the auspices of Parks and Rec would be looking at it, and, okay.
I mean, at some point in time, you know, there might be interest there
Uh-huh,
for public interest on parks and open spaces to that area.
okay, all right. We're, on page 57, we talk about lower cost housing. And, It talks about manufactured housing as being lower cost. I really want to address the, to verify that that's true. I know that I'm paying less my mortgage than the manufactured home people behind me. They only own their homes and they're subject to the rental of their spaces. I think we should look at the policy behind that. Can manufactured homes be put on? I know that some people have helped manufactured homeowners purchase the land underneath them or lease it for a long-term lease because they are manufactured home places are considered cash cows for the owners, and it really leaves people helpless who live there usually. I mean, they took all the trees down. I jumped up and down in the old too. So that's just a comment.
Well, aren't manufactured homes also?
Can I address that just briefly?
They can be.
Can I address just briefly what
Yeah.
is entailed? So what's entailed here is essentially it's a lack of restriction.
Okay.
So we're saying that you can have a manufactured home on your lot or parcel, and we're not restricting that as an accessible use. So it basically says that you can have a stick-built home on one lot and a manufactured home on the lot adjacent to it.
Okay.
And it's not saying or promoting mobile home parks, like what you're mentioning,
Okay.
where there's no ownership of the land underneath it.
Right, yeah.
But what we are saying is that manufactured homes are permissible in the zone.
Okay. Five. I started reading fast, you can tell. There's some conflict in language on bicycle parking, packet number, page 125, code, page 57.
In the code amendment on page.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Bicycle parking requirements, E, shall be provided with all mixed-use multifamily, this section does not apply to single-family, multifamily, and group living residential dwellings. So I think multifamily is allowed but not allowed, and I'm not sure exactly. That might need to be clarified.
You see that paragraph right there?
Yeah.
So it's subsection E, right?
Yeah.
Where it says requirements do not apply to single-family, multi-family groups.
It contradicts what the table says.
Yeah, it contradicts to the table.
Yeah.
You got that?
Yeah.
All right, we'll identify that. Good catch, thank you.
And on page 160, as a landscape person, you require buffers between the different land use zones, and you talk about screening, but I don't know, if I were looking at this, I don't know if it needs to be screened or not. There isn't anything, it tells me it needs a buffer, but doesn't tell me it needs a screen. So I'm wondering under what circumstances does it need a screen? That's,
What is the difference between a screen and a buffer?
a buffer would be, you would take 5 feet and you would plant it. That doesn't look pretty.
Right.
Trees and bushes and the whole thing. A screen, a
To be
fence.
fenced. Okay.
So what I'm getting from this, there are some conditions which require a fence and vegetation, and there are some conditions that only require the vegetation. But there never is a condition that requires just a fence. But I don't know what those conditions are. So you might just kind of clarify it, you know, under what conditions. On page 136, I was just a little bit confused about,
136 of the,
That packet.
can you give me the
packet page 68 of the, code.
page 68?
I just was confused. You kind of crossed out everything, what's the city manager review, what's the planning commissioner review, and so, I feel like it needs more clarification in the paragraph above it. Because I was really confused. I wasn't clear what is a type 2 and what is a type 3 view.
Because there's a table, isn't there?
This is in the,
Page 68, it's 16.40020 and 030. It's the administrative reviews for type 2, 3, and 4. Type 1 through 4, administrative reviews.
right.
Because we identified like a table for which.
Don't have a table. Are you confused about all of the things that got crossed out?
Well, the things that crossed out made things clearer. And so without those items there, just reading the paragraph, I'm unclear about what goes just to Mike, what goes to us. And so I was thinking about some of the smaller subdivisions that have come before the planning commission. And, you know, we see variances, but do the smaller subdivisions just go to administrative review? Okay.
At least right now, no change. So the idea here was, when we do these lists, the lists have never been correct in here.
Okay.
So we have the reference in the chapter that's dealing with these particular application types.
Okay.
And they always say for administration, this is reviewed as a manager review, administrative review, whatever. So my thinking was, we would just say it there in the chapter with the application that you're talking about.
Okay.
Home occupation, whatever.
Okay.
And not try to replicate it here.
Got it. Okay. So it is.
So that was the idea. So right now, for all of the different chapters, we don't use the terminology type 1, 2, 3. We just say administrative, city manager, planning commission.
Got it. Okay.
You point to an example like in the code that, so they can see it. So essentially at the top of where the list of uses would be, it would say, these uses will be done under a type 2 review.
Okay.
And then you go to type 2 review. And then each zone will have that. And then it'll be like, these uses will be a type 3 review, or these uses will be type 2A, or these uses type 4.
Right.
And then you would bounce over into the type 4 regulations that you see here. And under that, it would say how we handle those.
So these are definitions, basically. Got it.
An explanation of what that level of review is.
Yeah.
So an example in the code package you have in front of you is for 16-114-070. So this would be in this new Kingston Terrace District.
It's on page 187, page 87 of your packet.
Page 87 of the packet.
What page of the code? 18 of the code.
So you'll see development plan review process, 070, and then we have A for the applicability, and then C, administration, and then right there, it says how that will be reviewed as a type 3. We follow that same system or organization elsewhere in the code. So you talked about temporary uses, a variance, a subdivision, site plan review. It goes through the same routine of purpose, what it applies to, how we review it, and so on. So that's where it's identified. So then the way I'm thinking this would work is you just see type 3, and then you could go to Article 2, procedures, and it tells you everything about type 3 process and what.
Okay, bouncing back and forth. And I have a couple of typos that wouldn't have been caught by spell check. Page 123 of the packet, which is page 55 of the code. ADA accessible parking spaces, number 5, is probably disable D, says disable S persons, right there by the margin. Page 92 of the code.
92 of the packet or of the code?
Page 160 of the packet, page 92 of the code. You're probably going to want to say planting with a T rather than planning with an N. That's E, number 1 in this sentence.
You said E number 1?
Yeah, within 2 years of planning.
Within 2 years of plan.
And since I'm on these, he left. I noticed the SBC, there's something that talks about conversation factors rather than conversion factors.
That's on the FCC code, please.
Yeah, that's in the, yeah.
That's chapter 3.0.
Yeah.
All right,
But-
and what section?
I'll find it. I didn't write it on my notes, in my notes, but,
You're talking about the presentation or?
it's not in the it's in this, the analysis draft.
Oh, the analysis, Mike, it's the analysis draft.
So I'll find it and, let you know where it is before we get there. I thought that was really a great conversation factors.
Yeah, if anyone is reading through and find other, misspellings or, missed grammatical things, please let us know so we can straighten those out.
Yeah.
After you read it 500 times, it tends to blur together.
Spell check.
Or you just kind of skip over things thinking that you've already read it, so.
No spell check doesn't pass those.
I know.
Yeah, the spell check can sometimes.
How many people spell check their text these days? That's all I have.
With that, Chair Todd, so if we could just recommend a continuation until, July 26th at 9:30 of this one, or table this matter until then. So it'd be a table and continue, the public hearing on July 26th at 9:30 a.m.
Do we need to make a motion to do that?
Yes, please.
Did somebody make a motion?
Table and continue.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion passed.
we'll bring this back to you on, July 26th at 9:30 for further discussion, more public testimony, and, essentially just a review of today with hopefully some more information for you. And, test run diagnostics that actually illustrate that it works. So,
Okay. So do we close this particular public meeting?
It's, technically tabled now until July 26th. So
Okay.
public testimony is still open and on hold until the next public hearing, but people can submit their comments via writing. It would still be eligible to be accepted into the record over the course of the next 30 days until that public hearing on the 26th, and until such time that this body closes that public hearing.
Okay.
So just to be, so the motion passed 3-0 to table the public hearing to Wednesday, July 26th at 9:30 a.m.
Yes.
at City Hall and via Zoom. And you can get our Zoom web link off of the King City webpage with the Planning Commission agenda 7 days prior to the.
Mike, did the minutes need to be approved?
Yes, we
Yes.
skipped over that and we started the hearing, but that agenda item does need to be addressed.
So, now this says the January 25th,
The minutes,
the minutes from January 25th, is that correct?
pulling it up right now. Yeah, January 25th minutes.
So, any comment, any corrections to January 25th?
What is there?
I don't know whether it is there or not. I'm gonna have to go. 25th minute.
Oh, okay.
Oh, I wasn't there either.
A motion on the floor?
I'll second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, we have approved the minutes from January 25th. Do we need to,
The next item on the agenda is the public hearing for a variance. Mr. Dane and Mr. are online.
Yes, two.
Yeah, Mr. Horst is online. We probably need to promote him.
Yeah, I did.
Okay. And then, their consultant, Mr. Dane, is also online, available for consultation. I'm gonna hand it off to, city planner, Mr. Lyden, to address the variance request and feedback.
In your packet, you should have a staff report from me, a relatively brief memo. You also would have the narrative explanation from the applicant, giving reasons for the height variance. And then, perhaps most important, he provided some elevation of the building, so you know what they would like those folks to have in mind. Those elevations also can show what.
Okay, so they need to get into the house.
I will just run through some high points on the staff report. This property is on the northwest corner of 131st and Fisher. It's currently a vacant property. We have residential land uses surrounding it. We have some apartments immediately to the north and single-family homes on different lot sizes in all the other directions. On the west side of this property, there is a riparian area associated with Deer Creek that is protected. It's also wooded. So this property and the subdivision to the west of it, there's a buffer between the development on this property and the development that fronts on Southwest 33rd Terrace. And you can see that in the assessor's map on page 2 of the staff report. This property also did receive a subdivision approval back in 2018. It is going through the final phases of getting the plat recorded at Washington County. I've also included a copy of, a reduced copy, obviously, of the final plat that is going to be recorded here. So you can see, looking at the plat, the subdivision involved 16 townhouse residential lots, and then one larger lot, lot number 17, that's intended for future either commercial or mixed use or even multifamily use on that property. But there, excuse me, there's no specific development proposed for lot 17 at this time. So the variance request applies to lots 1 through 16 that you see there. On the next page of the staff report, you can see an aerial photo of what we have for surrounding properties and so forth. You can see the apartments that are immediately to the north. You can see the buffer that's provided by the Deer Creek riparian area. That includes the west portion of this property plus the subdivision to the west. You can also see that we have some residential homes oriented toward side streets away from 131st Avenue surrounding this. You'll also notice on Fisher, on the south side, there are some dedicated open spaces as well, right immediately adjacent to Fisher. The applicant is proposing to have buildings which would be 41 feet, 2 inches high at the peak of the roof. And our normal maximum height is 35 feet. The apartments immediately to the north requested a variance a number of years ago for a very similar thing. I think it was 41 feet even. Again, to have a 3-story product with a roof pitch that they felt looked better design-wise than meeting the code requirements. We have a similar situation here where the applicant wants to put in attached townhomes, and to have a sufficient amount of square footage, single garage and so forth, that needs to be a 3-story building, and then you have a roof pitch that they feel is a more desirable design and appearance, and also consistent with it, because 1 feet 2 inches instead of 5 feet. One thing to know about our height requirements is you could put in a flat roof building. So, I mean, that would be an option for them to put in flat roof townhomes. So the walls for these townhomes would still be the same height, whether you had a peak roof or not. We didn't receive any agency comments. And then starting on page 5, I'm going through the applicable criteria for variance that are in section 16-164-050. And, just give an explanation as to why, the staff at least feels that the variance criteria are met here. I think one of the important things here is that closest neighbor is going to be the apartment complex, which has 41 tall buildings. And then in other directions, people are really quite well buffered, both by their building orientation, existing landscaping, the Deer Creek buffer, and so on. So that you really don't have proximity, particularly with these buildings that might be considered slightly taller with the surrounding neighborhood. So with that, staff is recommending approval of this variance, and with a condition that the buildings do be limited to a maximum. If you have any particular questions of me, that'd be fine. Otherwise, the applicant can make a presentation next. You can ask questions of the applicant.
I would just remind the commission that this is a public hearing on a quasi-judicial matter, and that the applicant will has their opportunity to speak on their project, and then there will be an opportunity for proponents and opponents of the variance request to speak following the applicant's presentation. Then the applicant would have an opportunity to provide a rebuttal, and then staff follow.
Okay. Can I interject here, because it appears that I need to actually open,
Yes, that'd be well.
that would be good?
Yeah.
Starting to bang the gavel. I like that. I call to order the public hearing regarding case number building height variance LU number 2306 at 11:33. Any members of the planning commission wish to abstain? Do any members of none? And do any members of the planning commission wish to declare a conflict of interest? Appears to be none. Do any members of the planning commission wish to report a significant ex parte contact? Get none. Does any member of the audience wish to challenge the jurisdiction of the planning commission to hear this matter? I hear none. Does any member of the audience wish to challenge any individual member of the planning commission? Hearing none. For all those who wish to testify, please be aware that if you fail to raise an issue in person, Zoom, or by letter today or to the planning commission, you will be unable to raise that issue at a subsequent item on appeal to the city council or at a subsequent time on appeal. So, as an example, I declare this public hearing closed. Yeah, okay, all right, we're good. So, let's move forward with the presentation.
Okay, well, I jumped the gun. You got the presentation.
Yeah.
Then you would next ask the applicant for anything that the applicant would like to say about the applicant.
We have that online, so via Zoom. So, Ronnie, I believe we have Mark and Tyler as hosts now, and they can present on.
Hi, good morning. This is Mark Dane. Mike, did you want to allow me to have the camera up so they can at least see me?
Yeah, by all
Or
means.
not? If you don't want them to see me, that's fine, but whatever you want to do.
Ronnie's gonna work on that right now.
Okay, so members of the Planning Commission, good morning. I apologize. I'm actually calling you from my car. I didn't realize the meeting was going to take this long, and I've got to meet a sanitarian in about 20 minutes. And they're very hard to get hold of, so my apologies. So what we're asking for here is a height to the 35-foot limit. We are proposing a 3-story townhome, which was always the design and very similar to the 3-story apartments to the north of us. The basis of the variance is to allow a roof design that is more aesthetically sympathetic to some of the single family housing in the area, as opposed to having a flat roof or a roof pitch. If you can see, I provided some cross sections so you can see the facade. You can also see what it looks like from the street. I have provided a cross section street view. And when you're on the sidewalk adjacent to the property, given the angle, you can't even see the roof from when you're standing in front of the property. And from across the street on the other side, for example, on the east side of 131st, you cannot even make out the difference. But the goal here is to provide the roof pitch at a 612 as opposed to like a 312 pitch. If this was a flat roof apartment building, we would meet the requirement, but the goal here was to provide townhouses and to provide sort of architectural design that match that. And if you've got the cross section in front of you, I can't see whether you do, but I don't see anything on the screen. But if you do, you can see what I'm talking about here. We believe that the precedent has already been set by the apartments to the north, and to the west of us, we have the buffer and the wetland. To the south and the east of us, we have public streets. So we are not directly adjacent to any single family homes. The only building we are adjacent to is the apartment building to the north, which has a like elevation. We believe this variance allows for a better architectural design. We believe that it should meet the standard. There we go. Okay. If you look at the bottom right, the bottom or the east-west cross section, it shows it a bit more clearly, so you can see where people are standing. You can also see what it looks like with that elevation. I've also identified where the 35-foot elevation would be on those plans. At this point, it's fairly simple. You can see the staff report was very clean. So I would defer to you and be happy to answer any questions at this time.
Mark, this is Carol Bellows, Commissioner.
Yes.
What are your ceiling heights in the different floors? It appears that because of really great windows on the second floor. So I'm just curious.
If you zoom in on the bottom, you can see the elevations on the east-west cross section. On the building in the middle, you can see the elevations provided there.
Okay.
If you go down to the bottom there, one more, there you go. And you can zoom in there. They're not significant. We're basically at about, I think it's about 30 feet, 31 feet. The main difference is in the elevation of the roof. And you can see from the cross pitch there, we're at a 612 as opposed to like a 312. I believe the garage is 8.5, and I think the living is 9, and then 8.5 at the other main floor.
Okay, yeah. Good.
Oh my God, I look so ugly. It's that like, oh my God. All right. There we go. Isn't he supposed to do it like that or something? I don't know. Anyway. Do you have any further questions? Anything I can help you with?
The road that reaches up to lot 11, 10, 8, 9, is that gonna connect with the other apartments over there, kind of where their dumpsters block?
There's actually a separate pedestrian connection between the two east-west buildings. If you pull up that cross-section again, I think I've identified where it's located, because that connects to the existing pedestrian path that was pushed through to the south side of the apartment complex. So there is a pedestrian connection where we're connecting up to the apartment building. So there is there's a space between the two east-west sections there. And if you look at the site plan, you can see that as well.
Only bike and pedestrian.
Okay, so that road
Yes.
is just to like.
Yes.
Truck can get in there and grab the other adjacent.
Any other questions from the planning commission?
Yeah, the other company wants to put.
Who's that?
Someone that has their hand raised or something, or?
Do we,
All right, but we should open it for, public testimony once the planning commission is satisfied that they have the information from the applicant.
any public testimony?
So Commissioner Texel, I think what you'd like to do at this point in time is officially open the hearing to public testimony and call for testimony from any proponents first, and then we'll do opponents and then neutral parties.
Okay. And then I do have a question myself. Okay, I would open this to public testimony for proponents. Anybody wanting to speak in favor?
Is there anyone online or in person that would like to speak in favor of the application?
Yeah.
I don't believe any of the current members were on the planning commission, back when the mixed use, ordinance was put through for primarily at that point for the property on the corner of 131st and Fisher. And there was a plan, it included, attached housing exactly like what they're proposing in their variance. And I just wanted to make sure you had that information, that this would be consistent with what eventually will develop at the corner of Fisher and 131st.
Now, you were saying mixed use, and in my
Yes,
mind,
they
mixed
put
use.
in, well, that included a commercial portion, plus they were planning to use as a buffer to the residential to the west. I think it was 15 row houses, by memory.
Yeah, 16 total.
16
lots, yeah.
yes. And they were 3-story, exactly this type of setup. So this variance would be consistent with what was previously,
So where's the commercial piece?
Yeah, I couldn't remember exactly when it was.
But where is the commercial piece in this? There is
There's no, I'm saying, I was talking about this residential component to be consistent, and it would be consistent in both of those projects.
Certainly.
Okay, I just want to make sure that you had that additional information.
Okay, appreciate that. Any more in proponents? Online or in person? Any opponents, online or in person?
Is there anyone that would like to speak in opposition to the proposed variance.
Any neutral comments online or in person? That appears to be none.
So at this time, at the commission's discretion, you can hear any rebuttals from the applicant.
Okay. Any rebuttals?
We waived the right to rebut since there was no opposition testimony, and I believe we have staff's full support for this proposed variance.
Certainly. Is there, I do have a question of you. Is there someplace a site drawing that shows the placement of these 4 buildings?
Yes, there is. That was also submitted in the package, and it's the same plan that was approved a couple of years ago. What we have is a commercial portion of the site at the southeast corner of Mill and 131st, and we have the wraparound, as it were, of the townhouses along the north and west property lines. And you should have a site plan included in your package.
It is on page,
The staff report, yes, it's subdivision. So these townhomes would be on lots 1 through 16.
On which page? I'm sorry.
Page 2.
Page
Look at the bottom of page 2.
these are shared wall.
Yes,
Shared wall, so this is shared wall construction.
Oh,
So page
yeah.
180 of the packet, page 2 of the staff report, you see lots 1 through 7 on the north side. And then you see lots 8 through 16 on the west side.
Okay.
And so, Mark, how many total, say, if we look at it as buildings, even though we know that we're talking multiple units per building, how many total buildings? Is it just the 2 or is it 3?
There are 4 residential buildings. If you look at the cross sections, you'll see there are 2 buildings facing north-south on the eastern portion at the north end of the property. And then you will see on the cross section, there are 2 buildings facing east-west on the western half. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4 residential buildings. There's a driveway that goes between them and the commercial property that's at the southeast corner.
Okay, so Mark, help me out here. So it looks like lot 1 through 4 has 1 building. Lot 5 through 7 would have another. Lot 8 through
11, yes,
and then lot 12 through 16.
that is correct. And I actually put the lot numbers above the houses on the cross section as well. So you should have the lot numbers there.
Does that help identify where these 2 buildings are?
Yeah.
I have a point of clarification. Is this a variance only for the residential, or is it for the residential and commercial?
No. This is a variance for the approved townhouses. The townhouses were approved as part of the original decision. The commercial application has not been submitted. There has been no review, and there will be a separate review for the design of the commercial portion of the site. This is only for the approved single-family homes, and it's only essentially for the angle of the roof. I mean, it's a very tiny variance.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I'm assuming lot 17 must be for the commercial portion?
It could be. So the neighborhood mixed-use zone allows for multifamily by itself, single-family by itself, commercial by itself, or a mix.
Okay.
So they haven't decided exactly what they want to put on.
We're
17, but they'll.
currently working on that. but we needed to get this thing wrapped up and then move on to that, but we are currently working on that.
In moving stage yet?
I think so.
I move that we approve this variance. I move that we approve the variance to allow the builder to, to 41, is it 41.5?
It's 41 feet.
Okay,
You
a building height of 41 feet.
I have a condition in the staff report, so if you're, with the staff report, then that can.
Okay, so I move that we approve this variance according to the language in the staff report. Does that sound right?
All approved? Aye. Approved unanimously. Yay.
Make sure you can get into the attic.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Tyler.
Thank you very much. We're very grateful. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, guys. We appreciate all your time and everything that you're doing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The next item on our agenda is the presentation by FCS Group on the FDC report and methodology. All right. Sounds good.
I'm running the problem. If you have the one from yesterday, I'm pretty sure. Great. Got that on a thumb drive too, if that makes it easier. Right? Great. We ready? Okay. Well, thank you, commissioners, for your time today. I know that it's been a long day already, so we'll try to keep this one brief. Give you a quick overview of what we're going to go over today. Just a review of FCC methodologies in general, go through facilities plans, growth assumptions, preliminary calculations of FCCs, and then we'll review next steps, questions and discussions at the end. So to review the key characteristics of FCCs, these are one-time charges paid at the time of new development and only affecting development. In other words, existing homes, existing businesses, they don't pay assisted development charges unless they're expanding, building more capacity. They're available for the 5 major utilities: water, wastewater, stormwater, transportation, and parks. Today we'll be focusing on transportation and parks. Water, wastewater, and stormwater. They're for capital only. So in other words, they can't be used for O&M, that's operations and maintenance, that kind of thing. It's only for new capacity adding capital investments. They can include both existing and future infrastructure cost components, although today we'll only be looking at future infrastructure. And SDCs are persistent facilities, not local facilities. So think neighborhood streets. We're not going to be financing neighborhood streets through SDCs. We're only going to be focused on arterials. And we're lucky in Oregon in the sense that the legal framework for SDCs is pretty well laid out. Many other states that we work in don't have the parameters set up quite as ironclad as we do in Oregon. So we're very lucky in that regard. And as you can see here, it's all coming from ORS 223, 297 through 314. To give you a really 30,000-foot overview of what an SDC means, or what the components that go into it are. As I said, we won't be looking at reimbursement fees. That's the backward-looking components of an SDC. We'll only be looking at the improvement fee component. And a really easy way to think about this is eligible costs of capital improvements. So, the dollars that it will cost to build a park, or all the parks that we're looking at over the course of the study time frame, divided by the growth in system demand. So for transportation, we're looking at trip growth. So, the number of trips that are being added over the period of of the study. And for parks, we're mostly looking at residential growth. Those will be the folks who use the facilities. Next slide. So yeah, just to kind of reiterate that growth component, it's the denominator of this calculation. So it's half of the whole calculation, a really important component. And again, for parks, we're looking at population. For transportation, we're looking at trips. And we'll get into those more specifically when we discuss the individual FDCs and how we determine that growth. Go to the next slide. Another key component to all FDC projects is discussing the different approaches that we can take, or in other words, alternative methods of calculating the FDC. You can see that for each of these, we have a set of different alternatives. For transportation, we're looking at 3 alternatives: the city-led pay-as-you-go model, which is the most legally defensible, simple way of looking at an FDC. The alternative 2 version that we'll be looking at today, developer financing, so putting more of the onus of capital investment on developers to construct themselves rather than taking money as a city and spending that money. And then a hybrid approach where we identify certain projects and components of projects that will be developer provided and finance the rest. And again, we'll get into this in more detail when we look at transportation. In the parks alternative, this is pretty simple. It's with or without the community center. So again, we'll look at that in more detail when we look at parks. So this slide is meant to indicate that we have updated project cost assumptions based on updates to the transportation system plan. So what we're looking at in this table here is all of the projects that we assume we're going to need to finance through this FDC for transportation. And since our initial calculation, our initial release of the draft FDC report, we've gotten a new transportation system plan which reduces costs. So you can see here the bottom line in these tables, total project costs of $154 million and FDC eligible costs of $65 million. So we'll review that with the new numbers at the next table. So let's advance the slide. And you can see here that the total project cost is $145 million with FDC eligible costs at $58 million. It's about a $7 million reduction in FDC related costs. So that just means the fee is going to go down. That's good news. And that's mainly due to updated assumptions around the roundabouts that we're looking at through the transportation.
Tim, if I could just interject, so that one of the things that we were concerned about when you and I and Todd were talking about is where we rank with all the other cities around us. And I know at the initial out that we got, we were really high, like one of the highest, right?
Yeah.
With the reductions that got reduced, are we still up at the highest, or are we kind of more in the mean?
It is pretty high, but I'll note that, within the region, as every city updates their transportation SDC, they tend to see those costs go up because we've got a maintenance and capacity backlog as a region that we're trying to get through. And so many cities are just kind of coming to the realization that they need to invest in their transportation system. It's an unfortunate truth. But I'll also note that when we get to the bottom line of these, what we've calculated are what's called maximum defensible SDCs, which means this is the highest you can charge. It's a matter of policy whether or not you actually charge that much. So at the city council level, they could say, we're going to charge half of this, or we're going to phase it in over a 5-year period of time. So it's not immediately increasing your transportation SDCs significantly. There are ways that we can implement this that aren't so onerous that they'll make development extremely expensive. So that's a long-winded answer to your question. So the bottom line in this table, the $58 million, that's our eligible cost. So going back to that calculation of eligible costs over system growth, that is our eligible cost. So that's the numerator in that calculation. Let's move on to the next slide and talk about the denominator, which is growth in this case, trips. So according to various sources, including the transportation system plan, and transportation analysis on data, we're estimating that current trip amounts in King City are about 3,500 PM peak hour trips, which means trips that are taken around 5 o'clock. The forecast for that growth with Kingston Terrace coming online, 20 years of absorption in Kingston Terrace, and additional redevelopment in King City, we're looking at probably about 6,200 trips by 2043, which is this study's sunset period, which is an increase of about 2,630 trips. So that's our projection with respect to trips. And so that functions as the denominator. So we've got the numerator and we've got the denominator for our calculation. We'll move on to the next slide, which is, I believe, yes. So this is the maximum defensible SDC that we calculated using the old project list. So you can see here we've got a maximum defensible transportation SDC of about 17,700 for a single-family dwelling unit, and about 12,000 for a multifamily dwelling unit. Again, this is going to come down. The next slide also shows the old project list numerator using alternative 2. Now, you'll notice that this is much lower. We'll get into this in more detail, but again, that's the difference between looking to the developers to finance most of the transportation infrastructure and looking to the city. So let's skip over to the next one, which is relevance. This is your maximum defensible transportation system development charge with current cost estimates. So you can see that it's come down probably about a little under $3,000 there for a single-family dwelling unit, just a little under $15,000 for a single-family, and just a little under $10,000 per multi-family dwelling unit. We calculate these for employment uses as well, and that's available in the back of the methodology report. I think it's probably in your packet. But happy to kind of go through those details with updated figures as well. So again, I know that that's an eye-popping number, but we're looking at the maximum defensible, and that's what the math tells us. So again, a matter of policy whether or not you actually pursue that as your course of action. Going to the next slide for alternative 2, and again, this is developers financing almost all of the transportation infrastructure, and we see that TSDC fall very significantly down to just under $3,000 for a single-family detached and just under $2,000 for a multifamily unit. So this is probably what we would refer to as an extreme alternative. And what we'll probably recommend you do is look at an in-between, a third alternative where we look to developers to take on some of the responsibility of providing that transportation infrastructure as development occurs, but still have the city take on a sizable chunk by charging that slightly higher system development charge. So we'll be formulating that alternative 3 with your blessing after this meeting. So with that, I'm going to pause because I know I've thrown just a boatload of numbers at you, and wait until we wait to get into parks just to let you ask questions around the transportation.
And I'm a little more familiar with this since I've been working with you guys. So we discussed the hybrid option where, we have this component where it almost works like a reimbursement district afterwards, right? So those that are in the district pay like kind of an assessment fee right afterwards. Mm-hmm. So there's like a system development charge up front that the developer pays for, but the city's still on the hook for some of the other infrastructure that might be outside the confines of that development. That might be those last mile connections or last quarter mile connections or what have you. And so the hybrid scenario would provide the city a funding mechanism for those last mile connections, right? Whereas charging the system development charge up front puts an equal burden on every development throughout the way. Right. The burden would still be there, but it puts it's all front loaded. So alternative 1, everything's front loaded, right? Okay. And then alternative 2 that we're proposing here might leave the city short on creating those last mile connections. So what we're trying to do with this hybrid is make it so that the city has a pot of money that's guaranteed to make those connections, so that we don't end up with an incomplete system. That kind of,
That's a very, yeah, very well, yeah, a great way to describe the difference and sort of what we're shooting for with alternative three.
Okay.
I updated from the one that Ronnie sent out last week?
Yes,
Yeah.
I believe so. This is,
It's just updated.
Yeah.
Yes, your name.
yesterday. Yeah, we caught a couple of inconsistencies on our slides, so. we addressed that. So apologies for that late addition.
Do we have a, hybrid slide?
We don't, because we haven't formulated the item
Okay.
yet. We want to make sure that that's something that the commission wants us to pursue. So,
Yeah,
okay.
okay. What happens with increases in prices with inflation? A lot of places are having a problem right now.
Yeah, so that's a great question. You're asking about, you know, okay, great, we've got 60 million in project costs.
Uh-huh.
What happens to that when 5 years down the road, we haven't built everything and now?
It's
guess what?
70.
Yeah, it's 70, exactly. So, what we've tended to do is recommend as an implementation step, the city index the system development charge to, the construction price index.
Okay.
For either the 20 city average or, yeah, thank you. Either the 20 city average or the Seattle average, just to make sure that we're reflecting geographically what's happening, to spending. Yeah, so in the methodology section of the text that we provided, 3.02.050B, it would call for an indexing on an annual basis
Okay, I see.
to the SEC. So that's, yeah, but a great question and something that's really important to consider.
So this is not static, it will
Precisely, yeah, that's
go up as with the reality of,
right. And it could be indexed to, you know, other indices. It's just that we tend to like, because it's construction cost, it's the best, you know, indicator of what infrastructure costs are gonna do over the course of a year or have done over the course of a year.
and they never go down, right?
We can hope, and hopefully the numbers reflect that, but I'm not holding my breath for it. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever seen them go down.
Yeah.
That's expensive.
Yeah, public works famously always coming down in costs. That's.
Okay.
The wrong one.
Oh, don't worry about it.
All right.
There we go, okay. 3.02.040A, so. About that. Sorry. Yeah, we would recommend that. So that's
Okay.
the short answer there. Are there any other questions about transportation? Of course, we'll have time to kind of go over more general questions.
Now, the next slide in our part of the presentation shows regional comparison.
Yeah, we do have a regional comparison, our version about 5 slides down, and it shows all the SDCs, so you get a sense for where we stack up with respect to other communities, more broadly, because, you know, it is a good way. Certainly it's important to compare individual SDCs, but the kind of bundle of SDCs that you charge is probably a better indicator of how burdensome this is going to be on developers and home buyers.
Mm-hmm.
so when ours comes in at like 17,000. But there's additional, can you tell me on an average single-family dwelling, say, 2,000 square foot, because it seems like on the calculations, there's some missing variable that maybe isn't as apparent when I just look at it. So I'm trying to think, like, if I see a single-family dwelling come in that's 4-bedroom, 2.5 or 3 bath, how do we take that and then assess it or break it down on this when it says TSDC, because it's based on brick count or?
Right, so for a long time, a unit's been a unit.
Yeah.
So a single-family detached unit that's 1,500 square feet gets charged the same as a 3,500 square foot unit. So there's really no difference. At least that's been the way that it's been done pretty consistently. In the last few years, we've seen communities move to a square footage or size-based approach, where, because we can identify a correlation between unit size and demand on the system. So, and in fact, we have a few slides addressing that for King City coming up. So there is the option to look at size-based approach and charge based on you know, in particular, single-family detached. We don't really have the data to do anything else. Although employment uses are size-based too, but you know, for a single-family detached dwelling, we can vary by size. But typically, they're pretty static. They are what they are.
For clarification, do these SDCs just apply to Kingston Terrace or to now all of King City?
They're like citywide.
Okay.
Because they're applied to all new development to help pay for the roads and trails and mechanisms that service both Kingston Terrace and King City. So
Okay.
there's also stormwater concerns on this side of town as well as that side of town that we all need to address. And but what I can say is that system development charge only really applies to new construction. It wouldn't apply to you're doing your house remodel unless you're going to add an accessory dwelling unit or something to that effect, right?
Yeah.
So, but it would apply citywide, and it would be for any new construction that comes on board would pay the same fee as anyone.
Okay.
And except for this new development, King City does not have a lot of developable land.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
Everything's moved?
Yeah.
This whole frontage could be,
That's just it, yeah, we could technically see this plaza redeveloped. We could technically see the Randall's Bike Shop area redeveloped down there south of Best Western. And so, and we have other areas that could see some development, and so the system development, charge being citywide allows us to collect for those developments as well and put them on equal footing as east and west.
Any other questions regarding transportation before we dive into parks? No? Unless there are there? Okay, great. So let's move on to parks. This is much simpler. So again, we're looking at a 20-year time frame. We've got this table which shows you the different projects that we're looking to fund, their acreage, their costs, and expected metro funding. So what we do is we back out other sources of funding so that, you know, locals aren't paying for something that's already being paid for by a regional government or state government, something like that. So you can see there we've got this cost basis on the right-hand side of this table. And towards the third row from the bottom, you'll notice there's a community recreation center. And total cost there is $35 million. We expect regional funding to come in at about $28 million. So city funding would have to bridge the gap there, about $7 million. So we've looked at two alternatives, one with and one without the rec center. So pretty simple difference there. So we're looking at a cost basis of between $22.9 and $15.9 million. So we'll move on to the next slide to cover growth. So in this case, it's not trips, it's just what we expect to see from residential growth. So you can see we've got about 2,639 new dwelling units expected in the next 20 years, which translates to about 4,570. And that tends to be the unit of charge. So per resident would be the unit of charge, and we would apply that to single-family detached based on average occupancy of single-family detached, and then apartment. That's how we get to the different charges for the different units of development. The next slide, this is alternative one. So what we're looking at here is the higher of the two, the one with the community center, or sorry, the recreation center. So again, that's $22.9 million of costs. And we divide it by the expected number of increase in residents, and that translates to $10,865 maximum defensible for single-family detached, and $8,863 for your average multifamily unit. Again, maximum defensible, so by policy, we can bring that down if we want to. And then the next slide shows alternative 2, so without the recreation center, and you can see there, $7,500 for a single-family detached, and about $6,151 for a multifamily. So we're looking at maybe a cost reduction of about $1,000 on a single-family detached dwelling unit. So those are the two alternatives that we've got.
Excuse me, is there any research on, in the real estate market on a home that has a community center attached to a neighborhood that doesn't? So I know there is on parks, that if there's a nearby park, your home is worth more.
I'm not certain there is any research, but I have looked at about community centers, but it stands to reason that there would be. You've got an amenity right nearby. I think that's probably valuable.
Yeah. Okay.
So next slide will give us a sense for where we stand in the region. So you'll notice these two arrows point out the draft maximum defensible fees. So you'll notice the lower of the two, just a little above 40,000 all in for all your SDCs. That's from alternative 2, so your lower cost parks and transportation SDCs. And then over there, just under 60,000, you have alternative 1 with the higher transportation SDC, the higher parks SDC. So again, we're probably shooting for somewhere in between there. And you'll see that if we did indeed find an alternative 3 that's sort of in between, you would be right in the middle of the regional, the cities in the region. And even with your highest alternatives and charging the maximum defensible, which again may or may not happen based on what the city council wants to do, you still wouldn't be higher than Wilsonville Frog Pond. And as I said, over the next few years, you're going to see a lot of these move farther and farther up as construction costs increase and as cities address the backlogs of capacity that they have. So we're going to stop here too, ask if there's any questions about the Parks SDC or where we stand nationwide.
So it looks like our Parks SDC, even at the high end, is still lower than Beaverton, North Bethany, Beaverton, South Street Mountains.
Yeah, than many, and you'll notice, commissioners, that the green bar there at the very bottom is the Parks SDC. So you can see much more easily across and compare that. Yeah,
so even lower than River Terrace.
Yeah. So in Parks SDC, even at the highest is going to be pretty reasonable relative to other cities in the region.
And then, so really it's our transportation system development fee, which is up here with Frog Pond, really.
Yeah, I think it's probably lower than Frog Pond and lower than Wilsonville, excluding Frog Pond.
But Frog Pond doesn't pay all of Washington County TDT.
Right. Yeah, so there's TDT.
So with I do have a question.
Yeah.
The TDT, or those the rates that with inflation now compared to all the other cities, or are we?
So I'll clarify that. This is with current inflation rates.
Current inflation, so
whereas
that's
the
why
other
ours
cities
is higher.
haven't adjusted for their inflation.
That's why ours is higher than all the other cities, so
Yeah.
it's not really.
That's what Tim was mentioning earlier, is like as the cities update their transportation system plans with the latest inflation of like 20% or whatever it was over the last year or two, theirs is going to also probably bypass us, and we'll be right in the middle of the pack again.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have the highest until you don't anymore, and then everybody's fine. That's the way things tend to go, you know?
I just have a clarifying question. It's an FCC per dwelling unit in a multifamily building.
Precisely, so if there were 20 units in a development, you
It's
pay.
20 times
pay
that.
8,000 or whatever it is, times 20.
Precisely, yeah.
Yeah.
That's how it works. And again, you know, for transportation anyway, there are charges from, you know, for businesses as well, so, and that depends on the type of business it is.
Sure.
So those FCCs exist as well, so this burden won't be completely borne by residential development, it'll be employment too.
Yeah.
And what is this emergency, bell going off?
It's an Amber Alert,
Oh.
and the Amber Alert can turn the phone back on.
Oh, got it, okay.
Because,
Yeah, yeah.
All right,
It's an emergency.
thank you.
I'm very sorry.
Do not.
So, Tim, you had mentioned a little bit about, charging on a per square foot
Right,
basis.
right, so
Can
let's.
you expound on that just a little bit?
Uh-huh.
We have slides
Walkability.
to that effect, actually.
Those two.
Those two.
Okay.
It's just a very excellent, I think.
So Commissioners, I've asked, Tim to expound a little bit on the charging transportation, or charging SCCs based on square footage.
Okay.
Versus,
So this is an approach that we've seen implemented in a bunch of cities around the state recently to kind of try our best to make housing a little more affordable for folks who are building more reasonable units. So we've seen this implemented in Wilsonville, Silverton, Albany, you know, many communities over the last 3 or 4 years.
But in some ways it makes more sense because smaller units are going to be less expensive to build, and you may end up with the same number of people, but their household income is going to be smaller, and
Right.
if part of our aim is to provide reasonable housing, whether it is a rental unit or something that somebody can purchase as a first home, it makes more sense to kind of have that as a component of the.
It just sends the right signals to the market, I think, because it's not like this is gonna, you know, change everything, but it's a tool in the tool belt that the city can use, and I think it's very useful. So what you're looking at here with this graph is a correlation between household size and number of occupants, right? So in theory, your system demand will be larger with the more people that you have in your home, right? So, because you'll go to the parks more, you'll be driving more, you know, or at least like your household will create that demand a little bit more. So this is kind of the basis by which we do this. So the next slide shows estimates of how this affects the SDCs that we just discussed. So what I want us to focus on is the bottom there, where we're looking at home sizes and the scaling of these SDCs by those home sizes. So in the middle and particularly the right two columns of that bottom table, you can see the difference, the variation between a 1,250 square foot home, a 2,250 square foot home, and a 3,250 square foot home. So you can see the smaller home pays about $3,800 less than alternative one, and the 2,250 square foot home pays about $21,249 more, which again isn't going to make a home on its own more affordable to, you know, someone who's earning 100% of the area median income, but it moves the needle for them, and I think that goes a long way to help out. And it also, again, sort of right sizes the charge based on the demands that these different units will have on the system. So this is a policy option that the commission can consider, that the city council can consider. It's not inextricably tied to our methodology, but it's an option that we've calculated for you.
Or do you offer development credits for making homes that are 1,300 square feet and less?
Right, there's other policies that you can do to try to incentivize that as well, like potential reductions to the FEC, that kind of thing, that that could also have been still there too. So any questions about charges by square foot?
What's the scaling? I'm confused.
Sure.
Without with,
Sure, so without scaling, that just shows you the FCCs that we calculated.
Okay.
With scaling, these are the FCCs that are, so as they're scaled, so as you can see with, let's just take alternative one with
Okay.
scaling. So we've got for a 1,250 square foot house, you've got $21,977 in FCCs. If we move up to that larger unit, that's 3,250 square foot house, you've got $47,030. So those are the two differences based solely on the scaling. So
Okay.
the larger unit just pays almost twice as well.
okay, that's it, okay.
Exactly, yeah.
Got it, okay.
Put simply, larger units pay more. That's the.
Got it, okay, I'm sorry.
No, it's fine. It's fine. I'm throwing a lot.
Figure out what that was.
And so consequently,
So would that work
Custom
on
home?
multifamily as well?
No, multifamily, that wouldn't apply because there's, the correlation doesn't exist, and you need to show a strong nexus between the data and the reason for your charging. So the data exists for single family detached, and it doesn't so much for multifamily. So in order to kind of keep the city up, we could try, but it's also equally potentially a hazard for the city. So we want to steer clear of that. This approach is definitely legally defensible.
defensible or indefensible?
Defensible.
Okay,
We would
because
not send you down
if you were somebody like Renaissance Homes who considers themselves a fine home builders, I would think they would squeal.
They certainly have, this is, you know, by law, a legally defensible approach, so it is usable, the multifamily, not so much, we're not quite so certain about that.
Okay.
Any questions in general, or about scaling, anything else?
Is scaling somewhat arbitrary?
No, I could bring up the math, and there is math there. So what we're using is this nexus of occupancy by home type, and we scale it based on occupancy. So for instance, the Parks SEC is charged on a per person basis. So we have a basis to show that a smaller home with fewer people has a lower overall demand on the park system than a larger home would. So that's the justification.
And this, I'm assuming the same thing for sewer charges and
Yes.
water use and transportation use.
You could do it for all five. You could scale all five of your major SDCs that way.
And have you done that exercise for us or no?
We have not. We've only done that for parks and transportation because that's what we're analyzing this time. I think I'm wrong, but you don't have a.
We don't do it.
Right, yeah. The other utilities are charged by other entities, so the city doesn't have
okay.
control of it. Yeah. Right.
Perhaps in the future, we'll think, taking on more of those responsibilities.
Asking the question.
Certainly, yeah.
So in the end, though, the developer just charges for their product, what they charge, and if the SDCs are lower, they can just pocket it, or, you know, is it really go, unless we put something in there saying,
If you,
no, you can't do that, or is there a way of getting the developer to minimize? I don't know, I'm just trying to think of having the public, you know, really be benefited by the lower FCC.
Right. Going through this exercise and inevitably, or, you know, at some point you realize the developers are just pocketing the money.
It's just,
Yeah. I think that is a risk, but it's also something that, you know, we've discussed with stakeholders in the past that does tend to get passed on
Okay.
or at least a portion of that gets passed on to the consumer. So it's certainly something that, it's a tool in the tool belt. I don't think that it's a,
Okay, all right, yeah.
But if I could add,
Mm-hmm.
we want to make sure that the product we put out on the market is able to get funding and people are able to qualify for the level of funding it takes to purchase the house.
Oh, okay.
So if we have a system development charge that kicks the house into one of these like, super loans or, a multi-tiered finance structure, those are harder for, entry-level home buyers to get into.
Uh-huh.
And so we want to ensure, if we're talking about attainable housing and these sort of things, that the product that the developer puts on the market is actually attainable for the large scale of the population.
Okay.
So if we go too high with our SDCs, that makes it a little bit more difficult for the developer to put a marketable product on the market that they can then get financing for. So it is a juggling act here a little bit, but at the end of the day, we still have to have the funds necessary to pay for the items that are in our plan, our transportation system plan and the Kingston Terrace National Plan. And what Tim is showing you is a number of ways or mechanisms in which we could pursue to collect those fees. And so we've talked about how we do that. I'm a proponent of the square footage aspect. I'm also a component of kind of a hybrid mechanism where we charge our base and then we collect through like a reimbursement district those last mile connections over the span of a 10 or 20 year period. So that is not all charged up front, but it's through like an assessment. So like you're in a tax assessment district and that district gets assessed an extra, $200 or $300 annually or whatever we figured it's going to be. Maybe it's more than that, maybe it's less than that, over the span of the next 10 years or over the span of the next 15 years, so that those tax assessments come in and we're able to put that money aside to pay for those last mile connections at a later date.
It's a little like a local improvement district, but.
That's exactly how it would work, but the SDC would be there. So you still have a system development charge that would give you, certain pot of money that you could collect to pay for certain infrastructure that's like in your tier 1 list, right? But maybe tier 2 list is collected through the reimbursement district, or tier 3 is maybe the part tier 2, part tier 3 is collected through the reimbursement, and most of tier 1 or all tier 1 and part of tier 2 is collected through the SDC. Some sort of hodgepodge there that allows us to be whole at the end of the day, but doesn't put all the weight and burden up front on the developer and the marketable item that we're trying to put on the market.
Okay.
Sorry, long story.
Thank you.
good one.
There's pizza in the back
I can smell.
for anyone who wants to grab them.
So to give you a summary of where we are and where we're headed, we're looking at the schedule right now, and you'll see that meeting that's shown there in June. That's us today. We will, with your blessing and your input, we'll move our analysis forward, bring it to City Council on the 2nd of August, and then again on the 9th of September for the public hearings for adoption of these SDCs.
Okay.
Will we have a review ourselves, either if you're gonna take this to city council, I think I would feel more comfortable if we get a second look at your work on July 26th.
Thank you.
We are going to be going to the city council on August 2nd. But we could definitely have, I can take a look on, July 26th. Ultimately, I will say this, that the SDC adoption process is an ordinance that goes straight to the city council. So this is an opportunity for the planning commission to have a look and provide any kind of input to our consultants before we go to the city council. But yeah, we can bring it back before you on the 26th to provide some additional input and insight. It might be a little bit, late for us to make some changes or anything before the city council, but we can definitely take those comments and.
I would like the opportunity for us to comment and send it and send our comments to city council as one of the exhibits.
Yeah, that'd be nice, yeah.
That's right.
I'm not saying that we're gonna have a lot to say, but now that I think, at least I feel like we would like the opportunity to have some input and, and I probably, between now and then, I'm going to do some research on system development charges and kind of, in one sense, social engineering.
Sure.
Which is what I am concerned with.
Sure.
That we represent all of King City the best we can.
And I actually, got a question from Mike. At the beginning of this, as we gathered, you mentioned it would be really nice to have like a developer build the community center and then buy it from them, because that would be the cheaper way to go. Can you just kind of just give me a scenario there?
I wouldn't say that's an option.
Okay.
It's an option that the city could employ to get a rec center or community center. If a developer, for the interest of their development, wanted to develop.
Oh, okay.
Site,
I see.
and because these are like community amenities, right? A recreation center, at City Hall, something like that is an anchor tenant for any sort of commercial activity happening in a downtown and core, like what we're designing on the far end. So it would take a public-private partnership agreement to do something like that, and it would likely require the city to bond the purchase of that structure or building or some sort of lease agreement. There's a lot of details to be worked out there. That's just one option.
I would just,
The other option is we go for like a conceptual design, we get the conceptual design pulled together, and then we go out for like a community bond for facilities. And that's a longer, more arduous process. It's a little bit harder. One of the other things that is mentioned in the funding plan is an urban renewal district. So we form an urban renewal district, and we can pull bonds out of revenues that would be generated through the urban renewal district, and that might provide a form of funding to build the community center rec center. So there's a lot of different means or mechanisms to deploy or that are at our disposal here. But the truth of the matter is what the city needs. The city needs an administration building. We need meeting rooms that are capable of handling large groups. We need places where cultural activities can transpire within our city limits. We need places where people can gather, people can come together. And so that's why the city council had identified in the concept planning stages that we really needed a community center, community rec center, and what they were talking about is a combo where it'd be an administrative building with community parks and rec center as well as library is what they were mentioning. But given the current funding mechanisms for library services, a lot of libraries are struggling right now. And so we've kind of gone away from that direction, and we're kind of still hanging on to the administrative side of the house as well as the Parks and Rec side. So that's why we're talking about community center, rec center, and administrative offices over there to potentially anchor that commercial core off of Rear Terrace Boulevard and the east-west.
Well, I was looking at the difference between the parks with and without the community center, it's just about $3,000.
Mhm.
I would pay $3,000 upfront to have a community center. That seems like almost the cheapest option per person or per.
It is, and what it does is it also has it so that development's paying for services development uses, right?
Yeah.
But it also allows the folks that are current Kingsley residents access to a community amenity that they could love and enjoy for generations to come.
Yeah.
And we who are lucky enough to already be here will not have had to pay. And we who are lucky enough to already be here will not have had to pay the community, the development. That could be selfish, right?
Are there any other questions about SBCs, or should we wait until we meet again next month?
I do not have any further questions at this point in time.
We have a couple of discussion items.
Or more discussion?
Sorry, sounds like we should pursue the hybrid scenario.
Yeah.
We could consider phasing in, and maybe we'll get into that next time we meet. I think we're pretty committed to CY and SDC. And then square footage, sounds like y'all would like some time to kind of consider that too. The scaled SDC.
Yeah.
And then, some exemptions around affordable housing and accessory dwelling units. Sounds like we should bring back some information about that too.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other input? Okay, great. Much, Commissioners, really appreciate your time.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And at this point in time, it appears, is there any further discussion on system development charges?
Do we have any public input?
Okay, so it appears at this point in time, is there a staff report?
For which elements?
It just says staff report, I don't know.
Oh, don't we need a motion to?
Do we need a motion?
I'll give you an update. Right now, the transportation system plan was adopted on June 14th. So that is out, been signed, executed, and I believe we need to get to PLCD.
Not yet, I'm waiting for them to give me the.
The final version. All right, so then we'll get that over to PLCD. And that component, we have the Kingston Terrace Master Plan has been through public comment phase. The record on that closes next Friday, July 7th. I think that's next Friday. It was closed to general public comment with the exception of agency comments. We received a last-minute letter from Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife from a staffer over in Clackamas County. That letter has since been retracted by the agency themselves and an apology rendered for unsanctioned letter. So, we're gonna put that in the record, then the record is closed, and then it will likely go back to the city council for consideration and deliberation on July 19th at 5, I believe it was. Let me just check my digital calendar here. Yeah, so July 19th at 5 p.m. Yeah, the master plan is scheduled to go back to the city council for deliberation and potentially a vote for adoption, modification, or adoption with conditions, and then a second reading. So that'd be July 19th on that. Other than that, we have the code amendments going through currently. We're continuing that to July 26th. The SEC methodology is coming forward in August. We'll try to prepare something for you for July 26th so you can see the revisions and where it's gone after the input that we've received today. Title 13 and Goal 5 elements are going to be reinserted into our code amendment package and brought back to you on July 26th. I'm leaving for a long time in August. We have the 4th of July parade coming up next week. We are hiring a staff planner position. We're going to be reviewing the applications that we've received this week and probably into next week. We have 2 applicants so far for Planning Commission. Those will be considered July 19th before the City Council. We might do interviews with those candidates over the next week or 2.
How many seats would be open then for?
We have 4 seats that are open, and we have 2 applications.
So we need to recruit 2 more people
So,
for you
a
to,
little update on that. We did publish that a couple of times. That's open. We sent emails out, published it in the Oregonian, not Tiger, or not Tiger, not Tiger Life, the other one, Kansas Media one. And we still have only gotten 2 applications, so.
Well, and we've had people come in and grab applications, so we've had a few people come and grab applications, but they just haven't brought it back, so maybe they're still out there floating around. That's about where we're at. It's been a busy couple months trying to get all the, I still haven't had a chance to completely go through all this code language with a fine-tooth comb, and I've honestly been struggling to keep up with everything considering all the other jazz going on with the adoption of the transportation system plan and the movement on the Kingston Terrace master plan, and then these last 2 items. It's been a bit of a waterfall last couple months, so hopefully we can get this thing knocked out for you and get you something that's functional by July 19th for July 26th public hearing. What's that? Oh, yeah, so, thank you.
That's a big one.
So as you may know, Mayor Fender and I went to DC in June to lobby for some additional revenue funds for 99W or West Side Trail segment, or just our region as a whole through Metro's Joint Policy Advisory Committee on Transportation. We had a chance to meet with the Director of Transportation over there, as well as a number of other House representatives and senators for the state of Oregon. Pretty productive trip, in my opinion, but we'll kind of see where the fallout lies on that over the course of the next few years. I know funding is going to be a problem with all the internal politics going on in DC currently, so the struggle is real. With that, though, as we came back, and we were also, Councilor Manellis and Councilor Fender previously went down to Salem for legislative days, and we're lobbying pretty hard for our park project to get the funding for the West Side Trail segment or King City Community Park Trail. And successfully, we managed to be rewarded a legislative award of $137,000 to redo the park trail around the park playfield.
Okay.
So a win there for us. We also are kicking off the planning for our West Side Trail segment. This is the trail segment from Beast Bend down to the Tualatin River. And in that, where the trails are going to be playgrounds, dog parks, community gardens, all those things go into that planning work that's coming up, but, we're starting, we now have the intergovernmental agreement from Metro for that, so that will go to the city council on July 19th as well. And, hopefully we'll get that going and we can start contracting and bringing everyone on board to get that project off the ground and moving in August.
Nice.
So busy, lots of little things going on. We are, as a function of the Park Trail project, we're also talking about potentially putting in barbecues and benches. Yeah. Kinder Morgan is drilling a pipe underneath the Tualatin River, boring pipe below the Tualatin River. They will start their project this summer, I believe, and they will be staging out there underneath the Bonneville line to run that pipe across. So if you see any activities underneath the Bonneville line, that's not us putting in Fisher Road, that is Kinder Morgan.
You better put that in a citywide bulletin.
My understanding is it's 8-inch, gas pipe. They pull it, they basically drill it down and pop up the other side, and then they attach like a machine to it, and they pull it from the other side back and through.
Oh,
And
that's
it's
what
like
they did
pressurized
that's
pipe.
what they did for the pipe under the Willamette River for the, Tiger Lake River Water Project.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm sure it's probably very similar, so.
And this is a replacement pipe, it's not new or more capacity, it's a replacement pipe.
It was pretty interesting talking to Kinder Morgan and hearing about how they do that.
Mhm.
It's fascinating.
Okay, cool.
Okay.
That lot on the corner of Fisher and 131st, when is that gonna pick up building again?
Well, now that they have their variant, I imagine they'll be going in the very near future.
They got the, like, weren't they waiting for like PGE or something?
I think they were initially, and now they've just been holding off to get this variant. So they've been on hold for the last 2 months, waiting on the variant.
This meeting,
Yeah, for this meeting to happen today. And now that they have approval of that, variant, then they'll be probably seeking, from Alice, approval to move forward with the variant. And since we don't have any agency comments and there's no, opponent to the project on record, we would probably advise them to go ahead at their own risk.
We need to get the plat recorded first, though, before we can give building permits.
In order to get that, they need to do the list, right, the asphalt list on the.
They just have to make, what John said.
Yeah. They have to meet the engineer's requirements for the public infrastructure component, which is the asphalt and everything down through it. So those will probably be the next pages that you.
And it was 18 when that, I remember the planning commission meeting. He last came and spoke to us before this was built.
Mhm.
That's the
Yeah.
last time we saw him.
This was finished in 19.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Here, it wasn't even over at Crown Center, it was here, so. You know, all this is.
No, it was over at Crown.
No, it was here. The planning commission meeting was. The last time we saw him, I remember seeing him. He was telling us all about the, like, glass and how, he was a good advisor, Mr. Dane. It was, we saw him multiple times. I remember.
That's behind some little, desk there.
Picture window.
With that, I don't think, unless, commissioners have any, reports or anything, we can.
No.
I have to report on the, FCC thing, that I did read it, and on page 7 of you have, right above, the new net trips and stuff like that, you have a typo of conversation factor rather than conversion.
I took that, did you mention that earlier in the meeting?
Yeah, I did, and I found it.
I did write that in my notes, so.
Okay, great. That's what I'm
There,
looking for. I got it.
Yay, that's a good thing.
All right.
Yes, okay. I wish in our code that whenever we have parking lots and things, that there would be something that addressed more permeable surfaces than not. But,
In the code itself,
yeah,
like addressing sidewalks and
sidewalks, bioswales, those kinds of things, because the more land we cover with hard surfaces, the more damage we do. And people grow and move, and that's not going to be stopped, but I think there's going to be some mitigating code that helps to slow down the damage. But that's just me as a person. If I was sitting out there, I would be saying that.
One other comment, and this is a real pet peeve when I was in Tigers, is the tree codes, they allow trees that, do invasions, and I'm talking mostly it's parklands, but they're invasive root systems, which get in the way of the life of the.
Sure, of the other utilities, yeah.
But, it's getting a big enough swale for the trees, but also the type of tree. I don't know if you've noticed, in the Safeway parking lot across the street, most of the time by the beginning of August, those trees have lost all their leaves. The tree is not, that tree can be found in somebody's yard, but it's not well acclimated to be in the
parking lot.
bank that's a parking lot. And I ditched and mowed, and I was not successful before getting that parking lot.
In reading this 214-page report, there is a little bit that addresses that
Yes, but
in here. But it's not codified.
But it's specifically, 3X should be, not allowed in a parking lot.
Sure. No Dutch elm.
Since you're gonna be doing this stuff, that's the time to just go through and really look at the tree types that are appropriate for parking lots versus.
Right.
And those are called Pladictia Shade Master.
Okay, cool.
They're Shade Master.
That's right. We have an expert sitting on the planning commission.
An English plane tree.
Right, okay.
Anywhere.
Yeah.
Anywhere now, and.
Really?
Yes.
Because they're invasive?
Incredibly invasive. They put them in our subdivision here in Bradley Woods.
Yeah.
Everyone, it had to take out every single tree. It had broken every sewer and water pipe.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anyway, we do need to move on.
We do need to move on.
Yes.
Yes, but anyway,
Uh-huh.
I agree. So we have no reports, so,
You move that I motion to close.
okay,
Second the motion to close.
okay. And this meeting is closed at 12:59. Yay.
Like you said, but it is a real pet peeve that,
Sure.
I mean, seriously, we had every house had to do major repairs.
Well, the reason why our path around our park is you look, you're like walking and you're like up and down the path, right?
Yep.
Are as well, there's the trees that are directly to the side of that park, and the roots are going to come up, and they're going to.
Yep.
Because that's what they do.
And, well, just FYI, since you are a landscape person, English plane it shouldn't be allowed